For our 5th anniversary, my husband Julian mixed me a cocktail called Midnight Blue. He told me it represented the depth of his love, a custom recipe he had been perfecting for a month just for this night. I was touched. I took the icy glass to the balcony to take a photo for Instagram, stepping out into the cool Manhattan air. The heavy glass door did not click shut behind me. That small gap was the only reason I heard him answer his phone inside. His voice was low, urgent, and devoid of the affection he had shown me seconds ago. "Are you sure it is untraceable?" he whispered. I froze the cold glass, sweating against my palm. He continued, "Good. The doctor said 20 minutes. It will look exactly like cardiac arrest. I need her to sign the power of attorney before the ambulance arrives. Do not worry, Chloe. By tomorrow morning, the $50 million in her trust fund will be under my control." I did not scream. I did not drop the glass. I stood there looking at the city lights of New York and felt my heart slow down into a cold, steady rhythm. I looked at the blue liquid in my hand, succinylcholine perhaps, or a concentrated beta blocker. It did not matter. What mattered was that my husband had just signed his own death warrant. Before I tell you how I watched a man destroy himself with his own weapon, let me know in the comments if you have ever trusted someone who turned out to be a snake. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe karma is best served cold. I am Vivian, 32 years old. To the world, and specifically to my husband, Julian Sterling, I am a decorative ornament. I am the quiet, submissive wife who spends her days at charity luncheons and her nights waiting for him to return from his high-stakes job at Sterling Ventures. He thinks I am naive. He thinks my inheritance from my grandmother is the only value I bring to this marriage. He has no idea that the meaningless charity work I do is actually a cover for my real career. I am the ghost architect. I consult for the very banks that Julian is currently begging for loans. I know exactly how much debt he is in. $4.2 million in gambling losses and a failing company that is bleeding cash. Tonight was supposed to be his masterstroke. Our penthouse was filled with 50 of his most important investors and shallow friends. The air smelled of expensive lilies and hypocrisy. I took a deep breath, smoothed the silk of my dress, and turned back toward the living room. Through the glass, I saw him. Julian was standing by the marble kitchen island laughing with his brother Marcus. He looked dashing in his $5,000 tuxedo, a tuxedo paid for by the supplementary credit card linked to my account. On the counter right next to where he was standing was his own drink, a scotch on the rocks. My drink, the poisoned Midnight Blue, was identical in glass shape to his scotch glass, though the liquid color was different. I needed a distraction. I needed 3 seconds of chaos. I slid the balcony door open. The noise of the party hit me. Jazz music, clinking glasses, the roar of fake laughter. I walked in with a smile plastered on my face. Julian saw me and waved me over. His eyes darted to the glass in my hand. He was checking to see if I had taken a sip. "Not yet, darling," I said, my voice steady. "I was waiting for you to make the toast." Julian relaxed. He tapped a spoon against a champagne flute, calling for everyone's attention. This was it. As the room quieted down, I moved to his side. He placed his scotch on the counter to adjust his tie. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice booming with charisma, "thank you for joining us to celebrate 5 years of marital bliss. Vivian is my rock, my anchor." While he spoke, he turned his body toward the crowd, blocking their view of the counter behind him. This was my window. With the precision of a surgeon, I reached out. I did not switch the glasses. That would be too obvious if the colors were different. Instead, I spotted the pitcher of the blue cocktail mix sitting next to his scotch. In one fluid motion, I poured the remaining blue mix into his scotch glass, turning his drink into a dark, muddy purple. Then I poured my blue drink into a nearby potted plant, keeping just a tiny amount at the bottom, and quickly refilled my glass with pure water from the pitcher next to it. I added a drop of blue food coloring from the garnish tray. It took 4 seconds. Julian turned back to me, beaming. He picked up his glass. He did not even look at it closely. He was too focused on the crowd, too focused on the $50 million he thought he was about to steal. "To Vivian," he said, raising his glass high, "to a lifetime of surprises." I raised my glass. "To surprises, Julian, and to loyalty. May we always get exactly what we deserve." He clinked his glass against mine. The sound rang out like a bell. I watched his throat move as he swallowed. He downed half the glass in one go. The bitterness of the scotch must have masked the chemical taste of the poison, or perhaps his arrogance dulled his senses. I took a small sip of my water. It was cool and refreshing. We mingled. I played the part of the doting wife perfectly. I held his arm. I smiled at Marcus, his brother, who looked at me with the same disdain he always held. Marcus was a doctor. I wondered if he was the one who provided the drugs. Probably. He was just as deep in debt as Julian. 5 minutes passed. Julian was laughing at a joke made by a potential investor. I felt his arm twitch under my hand. 10 minutes passed. I saw a bead of sweat roll down his temple. He loosened his tie. "Is it hot in here?" he muttered. "No, darling," I said, reaching up to wipe the sweat from his forehead. "The temperature is perfect. Are you feeling all right?" "I feel a bit dizzy," he said, blinking rapidly. He swayed slightly. The investor looked concerned. "Julian, are you okay?" "I am fine." Julian snapped, aggressive suddenly. "Just need some air." He tried to step toward the balcony, but his legs did not cooperate. He stumbled, his knee buckling. He grabbed the edge of the sofa to hold himself up. The room went silent. The jazz band stopped playing. Julian Marcus stepped forward. I looked at my husband. His pupils were dilated. His skin was turning a pale, waxy gray. The drug was working faster than he anticipated. Or perhaps he had mixed the dosage wrong. He was never very good at chemistry. "Vivian," he gasped, looking at me. His eyes were wide with confusion. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You did this." The accusation hung in the air. The guests gasped. "Me?" I asked, widening my eyes in feigned innocence. "Julian, I have been by your side all night. You made the drinks. Remember?" He tried to speak, but his tongue seemed heavy. He slumped onto the sofa, clutching his chest. "My heart," he wheezed. "It is skipping." Marcus rushed to him, checking his pulse. "His heart rate is erratic," Marcus shouted. "Call 911. I pulled out my phone, but I did not dial 911 immediately. I opened the recording app. I needed to capture this. I pretended to fumble with the screen. "Oh my God," I cried out, making sure my voice carried. "Is he having a heart attack?" Julian grabbed Marcus's lapel. "She poisoned me," he hissed, though the words were slurring. "The blue drink." Marcus looked at my glass. It was sitting on the table, still half full. He grabbed it and sniffed it. "It smells like water and blueberries," Marcus said, confused. Julian's eyes bulged. No, I gave her—" He stopped. He realized what he was about to say. He couldn't say I gave her the poison without admitting to the crime. The trap snapped shut. I knelt beside him, taking his cold hand in mine. "Shh, Julian," I soothed, leaning close to his ear so only he could hear. The guests thought I was comforting him. In reality, I was delivering the final blow. "I heard you on the balcony, Julian," I whispered. "I heard you talking to Chloe. I know about the 20 minutes. I know about the autopsy. And I know you are currently experiencing the exact symptoms you wished upon me." His eyes locked onto mine. Terror, pure, unadulterated terror flooded his gaze. He tried to pull away, but his muscles were failing. Paralysis was setting in. "Help!" he croaked, looking at the crowd. She is, what Julian Marcus asked, frantic. "She is—" "The devil," Julian managed to whisper before his eyes rolled back and his body went limp. He was not dead. Not yet. I knew the dosage he prepared was meant to be lethal, but I also knew that in his greed, he would want to be conscious enough to see me sign the papers. He was currently trapped in his own body, fully conscious, but unable to move, unable to speak, locked in. The paramedics burst through the doors. I stood up, stepping back to let them work. I dabbed my dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "Save him, please," I told the paramedics. "We have so much unfinished business." As they loaded him onto the stretcher, his phone fell out of his pocket. It slid across the marble floor and stopped at my feet. The screen lit up with a text message. "Chloe, is it done? Is she gone?" I picked up the phone. I looked at the unconscious body of my husband being wheeled out. I looked at the stunned guests who were whispering behind their hands. I typed a reply to Chloe. Not yet. but the party is just getting started. I hit send and slipped his phone into my purse. The first layer of the game was complete. Julian was incapacitated, his reputation was about to be destroyed, and I was the grieving, terrified wife who held the keys to everything he owned. I looked around the penthouse. It really was a beautiful view from the top. And now it was all mine. 15 minutes. That was the precise window I had calculated. I watched the second hand on my diamond Rolex tick past the 12. Right on cue, Julian dropped his champagne flute. It shattered against the imported Italian marble, the sound slicing through the polite conversation like a gunshot. The room froze. The jazz band stopped mid-note. I stood near the pillar, clutching my chest in feigned concern, but my mind was analyzing the data like a stock ticker. The mixture I had given him was a masterful balance. A full dose of the poison would have stopped his heart instantly, just as he intended for me. But I had introduced a partial antidote into the water he drank afterward. It was just enough to keep his heart beating, but the chemical conflict in his blood was now triggering a massive temporary psychotic episode. He was not dying. He was about to destroy his own life while fully conscious. He was standing in front of Arthur Henderson, the chairman of Sovereign Bank. Henderson was the man holding the $20 million credit line that was the only thing keeping Julian's company from immediate bankruptcy. Julian blinked rapidly, rubbing his eyes. The drug was distorting his visual cortex. To Julian, the 60-year-old banker in a tuxedo was no longer a man. "Get away from me!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking with genuine terror. He backed up, knocking into a waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Silver platters clattered to the floor. Julian Arthur Henderson asked, stepping back and wiping a splash of wine from his lapel. "What is the meaning of this?" "You are a vulture," Julian roared. He looked around the room, his eyes wide and wild. "I see you. I see all of you. You are all demons waiting for my flesh." The guests gasped. Phones were already coming out of pockets. The red recording lights were blinking like tiny fireflies in the dim room. This was the social execution I had planned. Julian turned and scrambled backward until his legs hit the long banquet table. With a manic strength fueled by adrenaline, he climbed onto the white linen cloth. He kicked over a crystal centerpiece, sending water and flowers crashing down. He stood above us all, swaying dangerously, looking down at the very people he needed to impress. "You think I am weak?" Julian shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the crowd. "You think I need your pathetic loans? You think I need to beg?" He was looking directly at Arthur Henderson, but in his hallucination, he was fighting a monster. "I do not need you." Julian laughed, a sound that was jagged and terrifying. "I am about to be richer than all of you combined. My stupid wife is signing the papers right now." I let out a sharp, audible gasp. I covered my mouth with my hands, playing the role of the humiliated victim to perfection. The camera lenses shifted to me for a second, capturing my shock before turning back to the madman on the table. $50 million, Julian screamed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The trust fund. It is all mine. She is nothing but a signature to me, a useless, naive signature. Once she signs, I will throw her out on the street where she belongs." The confession hung in the air, recorded on 36 devices. He had just admitted to predatory intent in front of the entire Manhattan elite. "Julian, stop!" I cried out, rushing forward. I made sure my voice trembled. "You do not know what you are saying. Please, someone help him." I reached for his leg, but he kicked out, narrowly missing my face. "Don't touch me, witch," he hissed. Marcus, his brother, finally broke out of his shock. As a neurosurgeon, Marcus realized this wasn't just drunkenness. This was a medical event. Or perhaps he just realized the family name was being incinerated. "Grab him!" Marcus shouted to the private security guard standing by the doors. "He is having an episode. Restrain him now." Keisha. My sister-in-law was right behind Marcus, but unlike her husband, she wasn't looking at the patient. She was looking at the witnesses. Her defense attorney instincts kicked in instantly. "Put your phones away," Keisha barked, stepping in front of a prominent fashion editor who was live streaming. "This is a private medical emergency. Anyone who posts this will be hearing from my firm by morning. It is a violation of privacy." But it was too late, Keisha. The internet moves faster than a cease and desist letter. I saw the view counts rising on the screen of the person standing next to me. 500 viewers. 1,000. The hashtag Sterling Meltdown was probably already trending. Julian was still on the table, fighting the air. He ripped open his tuxedo shirt buttons, flying across the room. "I am the King of New York," he bellowed, just as 2 large security guards tackled him. They pinned him to the table amidst the crushed food and broken glass. Julian thrashed, screaming profanities that would make a sailor blush. He accused the security guards of being snakes. He accused the bank chairman of stealing his soul. I fell to my knees, burying my face in my hands. I sobbed loudly, shaking my shoulders. "Oh God, why is this happening?" I wailed loud enough for the cameras to pick up. "He was fine just a moment ago. He just wanted to celebrate our anniversary." Inside the darkness of my hands, my eyes were dry and cold. I felt the comforting weight of my phone in my breast pocket. The recording app was still running. Every word he said about the money, about using me, about the fraud, was being saved to the cloud. Marcus was trying to inject a sedative into Julian's arm. Keisha was threatening to sue a waiter. The chaos was absolute. I peeked through my fingers and made eye contact with Arthur Henderson. The bank chairman was not filming. He was standing perfectly still, his face hard as granite. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Cancel the credit line," I heard him say softly. "Effective immediately. Call the legal team. I want to seize the collateral before the other sharks get a whiff of this." I closed my eyes and let out another dramatic sob. The collateral he was talking about was this penthouse, Julian's car, everything he owned. The financial dominoes were starting to fall, and Julian was still screaming on the table, completely unaware that he had just become a pauper. "Get off me!" Julian shrieked as the sedative finally began to override my antidote. "I have to call Chloe. She is the only one who matters." I lowered my hand, slowly looking at him with the heartbreak of a betrayed wife. "Who is Chloe?" I whispered, ensuring the nearby guests heard me. Julian slumped forward, his energy fading. "Chloe," he mumbled, his face pressed into the ruined tablecloth. "My real wife." The room gasped again. I stood up slowly, wiping my dry cheeks. I looked at Keisha. She stopped yelling at the guests and looked at me. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She knew what Julian had just done. He hadn't just ruined a party. He had handed me the gun, loaded it, and pointed it at his own head. "I am sorry," everyone, I said, my voice brave and shaky. "Please, go home. I need to take care of my husband." As the guests shuffled out, whispering and staring, I walked over to where Julian lay panting. I leaned down, brushing the hair from his sweaty forehead. "Happy anniversary, darling," I whispered into his ear. His eyes fluttered open for a second. The hallucination faded just enough for him to see me. Really see me. And in that moment before the darkness took him, he realized. "You," he wheezed. I stood up and turned to the paramedics, who were rushing in with a stretcher. "Take him to Mount Sinai," I instructed them efficiently. "And be careful. He is very fragile." As they wheeled him out, I stayed behind for a moment. I picked up a piece of the shattered champagne flute from the floor. I held it to the light. It was sharp, dangerous, just like the truth. The play was over. Now the war would begin. The VIP wing of Mount Sinai Hospital smells less like sickness and more like expensive lilies and lemon polish. It is a sterile purgatory for the wealthy, a place where money buys privacy but cannot quite buy immortality. I sat on a beige Italian leather sofa, my hands folded neatly in my lap. To the nurses passing by, I was the picture of a devastated wife. My mascara was artfully smudged. My shoulders were hunched just enough to suggest the weight of the world was pressing down on me. But inside my mind was as clear and cold as the air conditioning vents humming above. I was not grieving. I was calculating. I watched the digital clock on the wall. It was 2 a.m. The sedative mixture I had arranged for Julian was metabolizing exactly as predicted. He was not dead. That would have been too easy. Death is an escape. I needed him alive to feel every ounce of the pain that was coming. Through the glass wall of the observation room, I could see my husband. He was strapped to the bed with soft leather restraints. The doctors called it a safety measure. I called it poetic justice. The man who had tried to restrain my life, my finances, and my freedom was now literally bound by the consequences of his own actions. The attending physician, a gray-haired man named Dr. Evans, stepped out of the room. He looked tired. He adjusted his glasses and looked at me with pity. "Mrs. Sterling," he said softly, "your husband is stable. His heart rate has normalized, but his mental state is concerning. We are diagnosing this as an acute psychotic disorder triggered by extreme stress and alcohol. He is convinced there are conspiracies against him. He believes everyone is an enemy." I nodded slowly, dabbing a dry tissue to my eye. "Is it permanent, doctor?" I asked, injecting a tremor into my voice. "It is hard to say." Dr. Evans replied, "We need to keep him under observation for 72 hours. No visitors except immediate family. He needs absolute calm." I thanked him. As soon as the doctor walked away, the air shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus, my brother-in-law, was standing by the coffee machine. He crushed his paper cup and threw it into the trash with violent force. He marched over to me, his footsteps heavy on the polished floor. Marcus was a neurosurgeon. He was arrogant, wealthy, and had always looked at me as if I were a stain on the family pedigree. "Are you happy now, Vivian?" Marcus hissed, towering over me. I looked up at him, widening my eyes. "Happy, Marcus? My husband is in a straitjacket." "Don't play dumb with me," he spat. "This is your fault. You are the one who pushed him. You are the one who drains his bank account with your shopping and your charity galas while he works himself to death. I saw him tonight. That wasn't just alcohol. That was a man breaking under pressure. The pressure of supporting a useless trophy wife." I listened to him. I let his words hit me. Once years ago, these words would have made me cry. Now they were just data points. I knew Marcus had 3 malpractice lawsuits pending against him. I knew he had borrowed $200,000 from Julian last month to pay off a hush money settlement. He wasn't angry because he loved his brother. He was angry because his cash cow was strapped to a hospital bed. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Marcus," I said softly. "I just want him to get better. You better pray he gets better." Marcus threatened, pointing a finger in my face. "Because if he doesn't, I will make sure the board of directors knows exactly who drove their CEO insane. You are a parasite, Vivian, and parasites get removed." I lowered my head, hiding the ghost of a smile. Marcus had no idea that I was not the parasite. I was the host, and I was about to cut off the food supply. Before Marcus could continue his tirade, the automatic doors at the end of the hallway slid open. The clicking of high heels broke the silence, rapid, frantic steps. I turned my head. It was Chloe. She was wearing a trench coat over a cocktail dress that was far too short for a hospital visit. She had clearly come straight from waiting for Julian's call. She was carrying a leather briefcase, clutching it like a shield. She looked frantic. Her hair was messy, her eyes wide. She spotted us and ran over, ignoring me completely. "Marcus," she gasped, grabbing his arm. "How is he? Is he awake?" Marcus looked at her, then at me. There was a flicker of hesitation. He knew who she was. Of course he knew. The whole family knew. I was the only one who was supposed to be in the dark. "He is sedated, Chloe," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What are you doing here? You cannot be seen here." "I have papers," Chloe stammered, holding up the briefcase. "Important company documents. He told me to bring them. He said it was life or death." I watched this performance from the sofa. It was pathetic. She wasn't here for papers. She was here to secure her position. She was here to make sure her golden goose wasn't cooked. I stood up slowly. Chloe finally looked at me. There was no shame in her eyes, only challenge. She was 26. She thought youth and beauty were currencies that never devalued. She didn't realize she was standing in front of the central bank. "Hello, Chloe," I said politely. "It is late for a secretary to be working, isn't it?" Chloe straightened her back. She tossed her hair. "I am the executive assistant, Mrs. Sterling. Julian relies on me for everything. The company would fall apart without me. I need to see him." She didn't wait for my permission. She walked past me right up to the glass wall. She pressed her hand against the window. Inside, Julian stirred in his sleep. Even through the sedation, he seemed to sense her presence. Or maybe it was just a muscle spasm. Chloe turned the handle of the door. It was unlocked. She slipped inside the room before Marcus could stop her. I walked to the glass. I watched as she approached the bed. She didn't open the briefcase. She didn't look for a signature. She reached out and took Julian's hand, the hand that wore my wedding ring. She interlaced her fingers with his, stroking his knuckles with her thumb. It was an intimate, possessive gesture. She leaned down and whispered something into his ear, her lips brushing against his cheek. Marcus stood beside me. He didn't say a word. He didn't pull her away. He was condoning this. He was allowing his brother's mistress to comfort him while his wife stood 5 feet away. This was the final confirmation. The entire family was complicit. They had all been laughing at me. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was the notification I had been waiting for. The DNA test results for Chloe's baby. I didn't need to look at them yet. I knew the truth. But seeing her hold his hand, seeing the blatant disrespect, gave me the final push I needed to execute the next phase. I turned to Marcus. "I need a coffee," I said, my voice dull and lifeless. "I will be in the cafeteria. Please, let her stay if it helps him. I just want him to be happy." Marcus looked at me with disgust. "You really are spineless, aren't you? Go get your coffee, Vivian. Leave the real work to the people who actually care about him." I walked away. I walked down the long, empty corridor. My heels made a rhythmic, authoritative sound on the tiles. Click, click, click. As soon as I turned the corner and was out of sight, my posture changed. I straightened my spine. The sad, slumped wife vanished. The CEO of Nemesis Holdings emerged. I pulled out my phone. I did not go to the cafeteria. I went to a quiet alcove near the emergency exit. I unlocked my secure encrypted line. I dialed a number that started with +41, Switzerland. It rang twice. Authentication required a robotic voice said, "Voice pattern, Vivian Sterling. Authorization code, Alpha 09 Phoenix," I said clearly. "Access granted. Connecting to Senior Director." A moment later, a human voice came on the line, smooth, professional, and heavily accented. "Mrs. Sterling, we did not expect a call at this hour. Is everything proceeding according to schedule?" "Better than schedule, Jean-Paul," I said, looking at my reflection in the dark window. "The target has been incapacitated. The hostile parties are all in one location. It is time." "Instructions," he asked. "Execute protocol," Phoenix Y said. "I want you to initiate the margin call on the Sterling Ventures loans. Invoke the distress clause in the holding agreement." And Jean-Paul, "Yes, madame. The offshore accounts that Julian thinks are hidden in the Caymans. The ones he uses to pay for his brother's lawsuits and his mistress's apartment. I have them on screen, madame. Freeze them, I commanded. Mark them for audit. Flag them for suspicious activity related to money laundering. I want every credit card, every debit card, and every digital wallet associated with the name Sterling to be declined by sunrise. Understood. Total asset freeze. It will be done in 3 minutes." I hung up the phone. I took a deep breath. I could feel the adrenaline cooling in my veins. Protocol Phoenix was not just a financial freeze, it was a scorched earth policy. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, Julian would wake up to a world where he couldn't even buy a stick of gum. Marcus would find his malpractice insurance voided due to non-payment. And Chloe would find that the company credit card she used for her medical expenses was now a direct line to a fraud investigation. I checked my makeup in the reflection of the glass door. Perfect. I turned around and headed back to the waiting room. I needed to be there when the cards started getting declined. I needed to be the supportive wife handing them tissues while I watched their world burn down to ash. I walked back toward the room where my husband lay bound and my enemies stood gloating. They thought they were wolves. They had no idea they were locked in a cage with a tiger. 72 hours later, Julian was discharged from Mount Sinai. He did not look like a man who had just survived a psychotic break. He looked like a man who was looking for someone to blame. The moment we stepped into the back of the town car, the air grew heavy. He did not ask me how I was. He did not ask if I had slept. He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot but sharp with accusation. "You drugged me," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact in his twisted reality. "You put something in my drink, Vivian. Amphetamines, caffeine pills. You wanted to humiliate me in front of the board because you are jealous of my success. I looked out the window at the passing streets of Manhattan. I did not deny it. Denying it would only make him angrier, and I needed him confident. I needed him to feel like he was the one in control. "I am sorry, Julian," I whispered, keeping my voice small. "I just wanted you to have energy for the party. I didn't know it would react with your medication." He laughed, a cruel, dry sound. "You are pathetic. You try to help, and you end up destroying everything. Do you know how much your little stunt cost me?" The stock dropped 8% this morning. Arthur Henderson is reviewing our credit lines. You have damaged the sterling name Vivian, and now you are going to pay for it. He reached over and grabbed my purse. He rifled through it until he found my wallet. One by one, he pulled out the credit cards. The Visa, the MasterCard, the department store cards. They were all supplementary cards linked to his main accounts. He rolled down the window. "What are you doing?" I cried out, feigning panic. "Julian, please, I need those for groceries." "You need nothing," he spat, tossing the cards out onto the moving asphalt of Fifth Avenue. "You are cut off. No more shopping, no more hair appointments, no more pretending you are a socialite. From now on, you live on what I give you, and right now I am giving you nothing." He sat back looking satisfied. He thought he had just severed my lifeline. He had no idea those cards were just plastic props. My real financial power was tucked safely in the hidden lining of my clutch, a piece of anodized titanium that he knew nothing about. When we arrived back at the penthouse, the atmosphere was suffocating. Julian marched into his office and slammed a stack of papers onto the desk. He motioned for me to sit. It was an interrogation. "Since you caused this mess," he said, pacing behind his desk, "you are going to help fix it. The company needs a cash injection to calm the investors. Liquid capital." I looked at the papers. It was a deed transfer, a quitclaim deed for the apartment in Brooklyn. My parents' apartment. The home where I grew up, the only tangible thing my father left me before he died. It was modest compared to our penthouse, but it was prime real estate now worth at least $2 million. "Sign it," Julian ordered, sliding a Mont Blanc pen across the mahogany. "We will sell it. The money will go into the company accounts as a personal loan from me. It will stabilize the stock." I stared at the pen. This was the line in the sand. He wasn't just stealing my money anymore. He was trying to erase my history. He wanted to take the memory of my parents and turn it into a temporary bandage for his hemorrhaging business. "Julian," I said, my voice trembling for real this time, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of suppressing my rage. "That is my parents' home. It is all I have left of them, and I am your husband," he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "I am your future. They are dead, Vivian. Their house is just a pile of bricks. Do you want to be homeless? Do you want to see me fail? Sign the damn paper." I picked up the pen. I hesitated. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. I needed him to believe he had broken me. "I will sign," I whispered. "But please promise me this will save the company." "I promise," he lied smoothly. I signed, but I didn't sign my name. I signed a variation of my signature that I had legally registered years ago for documents signed under duress. It was a subtle difference, a loop on the V that went left instead of right, but to a forensic handwriting expert, it would render this document void. Julian didn't notice. He snatched the paper away, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Good girl," he sneered. "Now pack a bag. I am sending you to the guest room. I need space to work, and I cannot look at your face right now." The next morning, the reality of his financial punishment began. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, but the expensive beans were gone. The fridge was stocked only with his protein shakes and mineral water. He had canceled the grocery delivery service. He had fired the housekeeper. He wanted me to scrub the floors. He wanted me to beg. But the real test came 2 days later. The hospital called. There was an issue with the billing. Apparently, Julian's insurance had flagged the incident as substance abuse related, which was not covered under his premium policy. The bill was $50,000, and they required immediate payment or they would send it to collections. Julian threw the phone at me. "Fix it!" he screamed. "You drugged me. You pay the bill." "I do not have any money, Julian," I pleaded. "You threw away my cards." "Figure it out," he said coldly, turning back to his computer. "Beg, borrow, or steal?" I don't care. If that bill hits my credit report, I will make you regret the day you were born." I walked out of the penthouse. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I sat on a velvet bench and waited for 10 minutes. Then I walked back up. I needed to perform the final act of this chapter. I walked into his office. I looked exhausted. My hair was messy. I was trembling. "It is paid," I said, my voice hollow. He looked up, surprised. "How you have no access to funds." I made a call, I lied, looking at the floor. "I knew a guy from my old neighborhood, a loan shark. He lent me the $50,000 in cash." Julian laughed. He actually laughed. "You borrowed money from the mob." I nodded. He said, "The interest is 20% a week, Julian, if we don't pay it back." He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "That sounds like a you problem, Vivian. You took the loan. You deal with the consequences. Maybe it will teach you some responsibility." He was delighted. He thought I was terrified, indebted to criminals, and completely under his thumb. He went back to his screens, humming a tune. I walked out of the office and went into the guest bedroom. I closed the door and locked it. I reached into my bra and pulled out the Centurion card, the black card, the invite-only piece of metal that required a minimum annual spend of $250,000 just to maintain. I had paid the hospital bill over the phone in 30 seconds. The $50,000 was less than what I made in interest on my bond portfolio while I slept last night. There were no loan sharks. There was no 20% interest. There was only me buying more time and letting Julian dig his grave deeper. He thought I was trapped. He thought I was desperate. He didn't know that the loan shark I invented was just a metaphor for the karma that was coming for him. And unlike the mob, I would not break his kneecaps. I would break his entire existence. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my tablet. I logged into the hospital's patient portal using the receipt number I had just generated. I downloaded his full medical file. The toxicology report was there. It showed the presence of the sedative, but it also showed something else, something Julian had missed because he was too busy yelling at me. The blood work revealed markers for long-term steroid abuse. I smiled. Steroids. That explained the aggression, the paranoia, and the heart palpitations. It was not just my cocktail. He had been destroying himself for months. This was leverage. This was proof of instability. If I leaked this to the board, he would be removed as CEO for health reasons immediately. But not yet. I closed the tablet. I wanted him to suffer the poverty he tried to inflict on me. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in. I lay back on the pillows, listening to him shouting at someone on the phone in the other room. He was losing control, and I was just getting started. The drive to the Hamptons was silent. Not the peaceful silence of a couple enjoying a weekend getaway, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a prisoner being transported to a maximum security facility. Julian drove his Porsche like a weapon, cutting through traffic with aggressive jerks of the steering wheel. He had not spoken to me since I told him the lie about borrowing $50,000 from a loan shark. He was disgusted by me. He felt superior. He thought he was taking a delinquent child to be disciplined by the adults. I stared out at the passing Long Island scenery, the manicured hedges and gated driveways blurring into a green smear. I was not afraid of what awaited me at Marcus and Keisha's estate. I was prepared. I had spent the last 2 hours memorizing the New York State Penal Code regarding extortion and coercion. The house was a modern fortress of glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. It was cold, imposing, and completely void of warmth, much like its owners. Marcus met us at the door. He did not hug me. He barely acknowledged my existence. He clapped Julian on the back, handing him a tumbler of scotch immediately. "You look like hell, brother," Marcus said, leading us into the cavernous living room. "I feel like hell," Julian replied, glaring at me over his shoulder. "I am living with a ticking time bomb." Dinner was served on the patio. The ocean wind whipped around us, threatening to blow the linen napkins off the table. We ate sea bass that cost more than a teacher's weekly salary, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. The conversation was a carefully orchestrated ambush. Marcus started it before the appetizers were even cleared. "So Vivian," Marcus said, pointing his fork at me, "Julian tells me you have gotten yourself into some financial trouble. Illegal lenders, very messy." I looked down at my plate. "I am handling it, Marcus." Handling it, Julian laughed, slamming his glass down. You are not handling anything. You are drowning, and you are going to drag my company down with you if we do not insulate the assets. Keisha sat across from me. She was silent, sipping her Chablis. Keisha was the only person at this table I respected. She was a defense attorney known for getting high-profile criminals off the hook. She was ruthless, brilliant, and entirely self-serving. She was watching me with eyes that were too intelligent for comfort. She wasn't buying the helpless housewife act as easily as the men were. Marcus reached under the table and pulled out a thick leather folder. He slid it across the tablecloth toward me. It stopped just inches from my wine glass. This is a general power of attorney. Marcus explained, his voice taking on a patronizing clinical tone. Given Julian's recent health episode and your obvious inability to manage finances, we decided it is best if the family takes control. I opened the folder. The legal jargon was dense, but I speed-read the key clauses. It gave Julian and Marcus total control over my assets, my bank accounts, and even my healthcare decisions. It was not just a power of attorney, it was a slavery contract. You want me to sign over everything I asked? My voice trembling slightly. Even the trust fund from my grandmother, especially the trust fund, Julian interjected. That money is sitting there doing nothing. We need to leverage it to pay off your loan shark and stabilize the company. It is for your own good, Vivian. You are clearly mentally unstable. You nearly killed me with that drink. You are borrowing money from criminals. You need a guardian. I looked at Keisha. She was still watching me. She hadn't said a word. She was letting the men do the dirty work, observing the prey before she decided whether to strike or not. I decided to poke the bear. Keisha, I said softly, you are a lawyer. Does this seem fair to you? Stripping a wife of her rights without a court order? Keisha set her glass down slowly. She leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the patio lights. Fair is a relative term in my line of work, Vivian, she said, her voice smooth and dangerous. But let's talk about legalities. You do know about Clause 7C in your prenuptial agreement, don't you? I froze. I knew exactly what Clause 7C was. I had written it into the contract myself, disguised under a mountain of other text 5 years ago. Julian scoffed. Don't bother Keisha. She doesn't read contracts. She just signs where I tell her to. She's too stupid to understand legal clauses. Keisha ignored him. She kept her eyes locked on mine. Clause 7C states that if Julian is proven to have committed adultery, or if he attempts to defraud his spouse, the prenuptial agreement is voided, and all marital assets, including his company shares, revert to the injured party. The air at the table went still. Marcus stopped chewing. Julian looked confused. Why are you bringing that up? Julian asked. I haven't cheated. Not that she could prove anyway. Keisha didn't look at Julian. She was testing me. She was throwing a lifeline to see if I was smart enough to catch it, or perhaps she was warning me that she knew I was plotting something. I am just curious. Keisha continued, tilting her head. If you sign this power of attorney, Vivian, you are effectively waiving your rights to enforce Clause 7C. You are handing over the weapon that could destroy Julian. I am wondering why a woman who is supposedly smart enough to secure a $50,000 loan from the mob would be dumb enough to sign this. It was a challenge. She was calling my bluff. She sensed that the helpless wife persona didn't match the reality of the situation. She was sniffing out the predator in the room. I picked up the pen. I held it over the paper. The men looked eager. They thought they had won. But I needed to neutralize Keisha before I could deal with them. I needed to show her that I wasn't just a victim. I was a player in the game. I looked up and locked eyes with Keisha. I dropped the mask for exactly 1 second. My expression shifted from fearful to icy cold. Laws are interesting things, aren't they, Keisha? I said, my voice steady and devoid of the tremor I had used earlier. They are just words on paper. They are only as strong as the people who write them, or the people who fabricate them. Keisha's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I smiled, a thin, sharp smile. Like that Sterling case you won last year. The one where your client was accused of embezzlement. You won because a key piece of digital evidence suddenly disappeared from the server logs. Keisha went rigid. Her hand tightened around the stem of her wine glass. That case was her biggest victory. It was also the case where she had bribed an IT technician to delete a damning email chain. No one knew that. Absolutely no one. Except the person who had quietly bought the IT firm 6 months later and recovered the deleted drives during a routine audit. Me. "What do you know about the Sterling case?" Keisha whispered, her face draining of color. Julian interrupted, oblivious to the tension. "What is she talking about, Vivian? Stop babbling and sign the damn paper." I didn't break eye contact with Keisha. I just mean, I continued, my voice sweet again, that sometimes things aren't what they seem. Evidence disappears. People aren't who you think they are. And if I sign this, Keisha, who knows what evidence might suddenly reappear? Keisha understood. The message was loud and clear. I know what you did. I have the proof. If you help them destroy me, I will destroy your career. I will send you to prison for evidence tampering. Keisha cleared her throat. She looked at Julian, then at Marcus. She looked terrified. Maybe we shouldn't rush this," Keisha stammered. Her voice lacked its usual authority. "What?" Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "We have been planning this all week. She is ready to sign." "No," Keisha said, standing up abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. "This document, it has holes. If she signs it under duress, a judge could throw it out. We need to redraft it. We need to be careful." Julian looked at her like she was insane. "Keisha, are you kidding me?" "We have her cornered. I said no." Keisha snapped, her professional demeanor cracking. She looked at me with fear and a newfound respect. "We are done for tonight. I need to review the files. Vivian should keep her rights for now." She grabbed her wineglass and downed it in one gulp. "I am going to bed." She practically ran into the house. Marcus and Julian sat there stunned. They didn't understand what had just happened. They thought Keisha was having a moment of conscience. They had no idea she was fleeing the scene of a crime that hadn't been prosecuted yet. I put the cap back on the pen. I pushed the folder back toward Marcus. "Well," I said, picking up my fork and taking a bite of the cold sea bass, "it seems your lawyer advises against it. And I never go against legal advice." Julian stared at the empty doorway where Keisha had vanished. He looked back at me, his face twisting in confusion. He sensed a shift in the atmosphere, but he couldn't name it. He was a man fighting a war with conventional weapons, unaware that I had just detonated a nuclear device in the mind of his strongest ally. I enjoyed the rest of my dinner. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't the silence of a prisoner. It was the silence of a hunter waiting for the sun to rise. Keisha was neutralized. Now I could focus entirely on the men, and I had the perfect plan for them. The invasion began on a Tuesday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. I was in the kitchen of our Manhattan penthouse making a pot of cheap instant coffee because Julian had still refused to replenish the grocery funds. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that usually signaled the arrival of the housekeeper. Instead, it was Chloe. She was not wearing her usual office attire. She was wearing a white linen dress that looked suspiciously like a nurse's uniform, but tighter, shorter, and unbuttoned low enough to reveal a lacy red bra. Behind her, a bellboy from the lobby was struggling with 3 large Louis Vuitton suitcases. I recognized those suitcases. I had seen the invoice for them on the company credit card statement 2 days ago. $4,000 of company funds categorized as office storage equipment. Julian emerged from his office leaning heavily on a cane he did not need. He smiled when he saw her, a smile I had not seen directed at me in years. "Chloe is moving in," Julian announced, not even looking at me. "Since you are incapable of caring for me properly and since you clearly have mental health issues of your own, I have hired Chloe as my private medical attendant. She has a background in nursing." It was a lie, of course. Chloe's LinkedIn profile, which I had archived on my secure server, listed her previous experience as a bottle service girl at a club in meatpacking and a brief stint as a receptionist at a tanning salon. But I did not argue. I simply nodded. "Where will she sleep?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "In the master suite." Obviously, Chloe answered for him. She walked past me, her heels clicking on the marble. "I need to monitor his vitals throughout the night. You can stay in the guest room, Vivian, or the maid's quarters, whichever is smaller." For the next 3 days, my home became a prison. Chloe did not just care for Julian, she erased me. She rearranged the furniture. She changed the passcode on the thermostat. She ordered expensive organic food delivery for herself and Julian charging it to the corporate account while I ate toast and apples. But the true humiliation came on Friday afternoon. I was in the laundry room folding the few towels I was allowed to use. Chloe walked in. She was wearing my silk bathrobe, the one I had bought in Paris for our honeymoon. She held a bundle of delicate lace underwear in her hand. She dropped them onto the floor in front of my feet. "These are hand wash only." "Vivian," she said, leaning against the doorframe and checking her nails. "The washing machine ruins the elastic. And since Julian fired the maid to save money, I guess that makes you the help." I looked at the pile of lingerie. It was La Perla, expensive, provocative, and soiled. She wanted me to touch her filth. She wanted to reduce me to a washerwoman scrubbing the stains of her affair with my husband. I did not get angry. I did not throw them back at her. I needed access. I needed biology. "Of course, Chloe," I said submissively, bending down to pick up the garments. "I will make sure they are spotless." She smirked, satisfied with her dominance. "Make sure you use the gentle detergent. I would hate for Julian to see me in ruined lingerie. He likes everything. Pristine." She turned and walked away. As soon as she was gone, I did not wash the clothes. I took out my phone and photographed the labels and the stains. Then I put on latex gloves. I wasn't cleaning them for her. I was inspecting them. But the real prize wasn't on the clothes. It was what she had left behind in the bathroom. Later that afternoon, I went into the master bathroom to replace the towels, a task Chloe had assigned to me. The counter was cluttered with her beauty products. La Mer creams, Chanel perfumes, all bought with embezzled funds. But sitting right next to Julian's shaving kit was a small white stick. A pregnancy test. It was not hidden in the trash. It was not tucked in a drawer. It was sitting right there on the black granite displayed like a trophy. 2 bold pink lines, positive. I stared at it. A normal wife would have collapsed. A normal wife would have screamed. I felt a surge of cold adrenaline. A baby. This was her ace in the hole. This was why she was so confident. She wasn't just the mistress, she was the mother of the heir. Or so she thought. I knew Julian had been taking testosterone supplements and steroids for years to maintain his physique. One of the side effects which I had read in his medical file was a significantly reduced sperm count. It was not impossible for him to conceive, but it was statistically unlikely. I looked at the toothbrush standing in the glass cup next to the test. It was pink, electric, Chloe's. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a sterile Ziploc bag I had been carrying for 2 days, waiting for this exact opportunity. I picked up the toothbrush. I placed it inside the bag and sealed it tight. Then I went to the small trash can under the sink. I dug through the tissues and cotton balls until I found used dental floss. I bagged that too. I needed a control sample. I walked over to Julian's hairbrush, which was full of his dark strands. I took a clump of hair, ensuring the follicles were attached, into a second bag. I now had the DNA of the mother, the alleged father, and the unborn child's biological markers via the fetal cell residue, often found on early-stage personal items, though a blood test would be better. But for a preliminary paternity test, the toothbrush and hair would suffice to prove lack of relation if the markers were distinct enough. Or better yet, I could compare Chloe's DNA against the coffee cup I had saved from Marcus Julian's brother when we were in the Hamptons. Marcus, who had a reputation for being generous with his affection toward Julian's staff. I hid the bags in the lining of my jacket. I walked out of the bathroom and found Chloe in the kitchen. She was eating a bowl of strawberries, my strawberries, and reading a magazine. "I washed your things," I said, standing by the refrigerator. "They are drying in the sun." "Thanks," she said with her mouth full. "You are actually useful when you stop trying to be a CEO's wife." "I saw the test, Chloe," I said calmly. She stopped chewing. She put the spoon down and turned to me, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. "I wondered how long it would take you," she said. "Yes, I am pregnant. We are going to announce it at the shareholders' meeting next week. Julian is going to divorce you, Vivian. He needs a family, a real family, not a barren piece of ice like you." I walked over to the counter and poured myself a glass of tap water. I took a sip, watching her gloat. "Congratulations," I said. "A baby is a blessing, but you should be careful, Chloe. Are you threatening me?" She laughed. "What are you going to do? Poison me like you did him?" "No," I said, setting the glass down. "I am talking about stress. High cortisol levels are dangerous for a first trimester pregnancy, and getting fired is very stressful." Chloe threw her head back and laughed. It was a loud grating sound. "Fired. Who is going to fire me?" You have no power here. You are a guest in my house. Julian is the CEO. He owns this company. He owns this apartment. He owns you." I looked at her. She really believed it. She believed the title on the door meant power. She didn't understand that a CEO answers to a board, and a board answers to the shareholders, and the majority shareholder was currently standing in front of her wearing a faded t-shirt and drinking tap water. "Julian is a CEO," I agreed, "but CEOs serve at the pleasure of the board. And when the board finds out about the embezzlement, the fraud, and the moral turpitude clause being violated by impregnating a subordinate, well, it won't just be him leaving the building, it will be you too. And health insurance usually terminates on the same day as employment. Prenatal care is expensive in New York, Chloe." Chloe's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She narrowed her eyes. "You are bluffing," she sneered. "Julian has the board in his pocket, and even if he didn't, we have millions tucked away. We don't need the salary." I didn't correct her. I didn't tell her that the millions tucked away in the Cayman Islands had been frozen by my Swiss bankers 3 hours ago. I didn't tell her that the credit card she used to buy those strawberries was about to be declined for the first time. I just smiled, a sad, pitying smile. "I hope you are right, Chloe," I said softly, "for the baby's sake. It would be a shame if this child was born into bankruptcy." I turned and walked back to the guest room. As I closed the door, I heard the silence in the kitchen. She wasn't laughing anymore. She was thinking. And fear was the first step. I sat on the narrow bed and pulled out the Ziploc bags. I took a pre-addressed envelope from under the mattress. It was addressed to a private genetic lab in New Jersey. I put the samples inside. "Priority overnight shipping," I whispered to myself. I would have the results in 48 hours, just in time for the shareholders' meeting she was so excited about. I lay back on the bed and closed my eyes. The laundry was done, the samples were collected, the trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the mouse to take the cheese. The press conference was staged with the precision of a Broadway play. Julian had rented a podium right in the middle of Times Square, directly beneath the massive LED billboard that usually displayed advertisements for Coca-Cola or the latest Marvel movie. Today, it displayed the Sterling Ventures logo in a somber navy blue. Julian stood on the raised platform, surrounded by a phalanx of microphones. He was not wearing his usual Italian silk suit. He was wearing a modest charcoal gray jacket, a white shirt with no tie, and he had deliberately left his hair slightly unkempt. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. He looked like a grieving husband, burdened by a tragedy. It was a perfect performance. I was watching him from the comfort of our penthouse living room 3 miles away. I was wearing my silk pajamas and drinking a cup of Earl Grey tea. On my lap sat a customized laptop with a black matte finish. The screen did not show a web browser. It showed a command terminal with lines of green code scrolling faster than the human eye could read. I wasn't just watching the news feed, I was inside the feed. Julian cleared his throat. The noise of the city seemed to dampen as the reporters leaned in. He looked into the cameras with soulful, sad eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice catching slightly, "thank you for coming. It is with a heavy heart that I address the rumors circulating about the incident at my anniversary party. As many of you know, my wife Vivian suffered a severe mental breakdown that night." He paused for effect. He wiped a non-existent tear from his eye. The flashbulbs popped like fireworks. "The doctors at Mount Sinai have confirmed that Vivian is suffering from paranoid delusions and acute hysteria," he continued, gaining confidence. "She has become a danger to herself and to others. It is a tragedy. I love my wife dearly, but her actions have jeopardized the stability of this company. Therefore, I have filed an emergency petition with the Supreme Court of New York to be granted full conservatorship over her estate." I took a sip of tea. Conservatorship. He was going for the nuclear option. He wanted to do to me what they did to Britney Spears. He wanted to declare me legally incompetent so he could seize control of the $50 million trust fund without my signature. It was a bold move. It was also a stupid move. He continued, his voice rising with righteous conviction. I am doing this to protect her. Vivian is not well. She makes wild accusations. She spends money recklessly. She imagines enemies where there are none. I ask the public and our investors for privacy and patience as I take control of the situation. I will be managing her assets solely for her medical care and rehabilitation. He looked so noble, so selfless. The reporters were nodding. They were buying it. The narrative was setting like concrete. Poor Julian, burdened with a crazy wife. He is a hero for standing by her. I looked at the time on my laptop. 10:02 a.m. The live feed from Times Square showed Julian taking a breath to answer the first question. Mr. Sterling, a reporter from the Times shouted, is it true that the police are investigating the poisoning allegations? Julian shook his head sadly. My wife is confused. There was no poison, just a mixture of medication and alcohol. It is a cry for help. That was my cue. I did not feel anger. I felt the cold clinical satisfaction of a surgeon making the first incision. I typed a single line of code into the terminal, override _display _main _ID _TSQ _01, execute. I hovered my finger over the enter key. Julian was smiling at the camera, thinking he had won. He thought the screen behind him was just a backdrop. He didn't know that I had purchased the back-end access to that specific digital billboard through a shell company in Singapore 3 months ago. I hadn't bought it for advertising. I had bought it for insurance. I pressed enter. On the television screen, the massive blue logo behind Julian flickered. It glitched once, turning static gray. Then it went black. Julian didn't notice at first. He was still talking. We are strong. The company is strong. We will get through this. Then a gasp rippled through the crowd. It started as a murmur and grew into a roar. People were pointing up. The reporters stopped looking at Julian and looked above his head. Julian frowned. He turned around slowly. The black screen exploded into color. It was high-definition footage, 4K resolution. The timestamp in the corner read October 14th, 11:42 p.m. Location: the Bellagio Hotel, Las Vegas. High limit room. The video was clear. It showed Julian sitting at a blackjack table. He was not looking sad. He was not looking responsible. He was drunk, his tie undone, a cigar in one hand and a stack of chips in the other. Sitting on his lap was a woman who was definitely not me. It wasn't even Chloe. It was a cocktail waitress. The audio from the video boomed across Times Square, amplified by the billboard sound system, which I had also hacked. It drowned out the traffic. It drowned out Julian's protests. All in the video. Julian shouted, shoving a mountain of chips forward. Sir, the dealer said, his voice professional and clear. That is $2 million. You are already down $8 million for the night. Are you sure? Julian laughed. It was the laugh of a man who didn't respect money because he didn't earn it. I am sure, video, Julian slurred. Put it on the marker. Sir, the dealer persisted. Your credit line is maxed out. We need a signature for the house extension. Julian grabbed a pen. The camera zoomed in on the document. It was a marker, an IOU, $10 million total debt. Give me the pen, Julian yelled. Who cares? The company pays for it. My wife doesn't check the ledgers. She is too busy buying flowers. The crowd in Times Square went silent. The video looped. The company pays for it. My wife doesn't check the ledgers. Real-life Julian stood on the podium, frozen. He looked tiny beneath his own image, his face drained of all color. He looked like a ghost. He tried to speak into the microphones, but they were dead. I had cut the audio feed to the podium at the same moment I hijacked the screen. He waved his hands trying to block the screen, but he was 6 feet tall and the screen was 60 feet tall. He was an ant trying to block out the sun. The reporters turned on him instantly. The sympathy evaporated. They weren't looking at a grieving husband anymore. They were looking at a fraudster who had just admitted to embezzling corporate funds on tape. Mr. Sterling, a reporter screamed. Did you gamble away the company assets? Is this why you want conservatorship, to pay your gambling debts? Who is the woman in the video? Mr. Sterling. Julian panicked. He shoved a cameraman out of the way. He tried to run toward his waiting car, but the crowd blocked him. The mob that had been ready to pity him was now ready to tear him apart. Investors were watching. The board was watching. The SEC was definitely watching. I watched him struggle. I watched him sweat. I watched the security guards try to shield him from the barrage of questions. Then I typed one more command. The video on the screen changed. It cut to a still image. It was a document, a bank transfer slip, dated 2 days after the Vegas video. It showed a transfer of $200,000 from the Sterling Charity Foundation to Bellagio Resorts. Beneath it in bold red letters, I overlaid the text, "The charity pays for the casino." That was the nail in the coffin. Stealing from shareholders is bad. Stealing from a charity meant for sick children. That is social suicide. I saw Julian look up at the screen one last time before he was shoved into the back seat of his car. He saw the document. He knew. He knew it wasn't a glitch. He knew it wasn't a coincidence. He looked directly into the news camera, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He knew I was watching. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. The reflection showed my face. I looked calm. I looked sane. I picked up my teacup. It was still warm. I took a slow sip, savoring the bergamot flavor. Mental breakdown, I whispered to the empty room. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere down there in the chaos of Times Square, my husband was experiencing the worst day of his life. And I was just getting started. I hadn't even released the medical records yet. I went to my desk and picked up the phone. It was time to make the call to the chairman of the board. After all, they would need an interim CEO, now that their current one was a proven liability. And I had a very impressive resume that they had never bothered to read. I dialed the number. "Hello, Arthur," I said when he answered. "I think you saw the news. We need to talk." The game had shifted. The pawn had just taken the king, and the queen was ready to rule. The headquarters of Sterling Ventures is usually a cathedral of silence and intimidation. It is a place where whispers echo off polished glass walls, and interns are afraid to breathe too loudly. But on this Monday morning, it sounded like a slaughterhouse. The phones were ringing in a discordant, unending loop. The sound of industrial shredders humming in the background provided a frantic bass line to the chaos. Staff members were running through the corridors with boxes, clearing out their desks before the ship went under. And in the center of the storm, inside the glass-walled CEO office, Julian was screaming. He looked like a man possessed. His charcoal suit from the disastrous press conference was rumpled. He had clearly slept in the office, or rather he had spent the night pacing the floor. He was shouting at his personal assistant, a terrified young woman named Sarah, who was trembling as she held a phone receiver against her chest. "Get her on the line," Julian roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany desk. "I do not care if she is in a therapy session. I do not care if she is asleep. Call the house landline. Call the neighbors. Find my wife." Sarah stammered. "Sir, I have tried. The line is disconnected." "Then drive there." Julian spat, veins bulging in his neck. "Drive to the penthouse and drag her here. I need her signature. The bank is giving us until noon to post collateral. We have to sell her parents' apartment in Brooklyn. It is the only asset left that isn't frozen." "Go." He was delirious. He truly believed that selling a $2 million brownstone would plug a $40 million hole in his balance sheet. It was the logic of a desperate gambler chasing his losses. He turned to the window, looking down at the street where news vans were still parked, waiting for a glimpse of the fallen golden boy. Before Sarah could leave, the double-glass doors of the office swung open. They did not open for Sarah. They opened for a phalanx of 6 men in dark, identical suits. They moved with the synchronized precision of a military unit. They did not look like bankers. They looked like undertakers. Julian spun around. "Who are you? You cannot just walk in here." "Security." "There is no security, Mr. Sterling," the man at the front said. His voice was smooth, deep, and utterly devoid of warmth. "We dismissed them 10 minutes ago," Julian faltered. He straightened his tie, trying to summon the arrogance that had served him for a decade. "And who are you to dismiss my staff? I am the CEO of this company." The man placed a heavy briefcase on the desk, right on top of Julian's scattered papers. "I am Arthur Blackwood, Senior Counsel for V Capital. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, you are the CEO of nothing but a pile of debt." Julian laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "V Capital. I have never heard of you. I deal with Sovereign Bank. I deal with Chase. I don't deal with no-name vulture funds. Get out of my office before I call the police." Mr. Blackwood did not blink. He opened the briefcase and slid a single document across the desk. It was thick-bound in blue leather. "Sovereign Bank was happy to sell us your debt," Mr. Sterling Blackwood said calmly. "They considered it a toxic asset. They sold your $42 million in liabilities to us for 60 cents on the dollar. They just wanted to wash their hands of you." Sob. Julian stared at the document. He flipped through the pages, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. He saw the transfer stamps. He saw the bank seals. It was real. So what Julian sneered, trying to bluff. "So I owe you now instead of them. I will set up a payment plan. I just need time. My wife has assets. We are liquidating some real estate today." Mr. Blackwood smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We are not interested in a payment plan, Mr. Sterling, and we are certainly not interested in your wife's childhood home. We are interested in immediate restructuring. The terms of the debt acquisition give us the right to call the full amount due immediately if there is evidence of mismanagement. And judging by the video in Times Square yesterday, mismanagement is an understatement." Julian paled. "You cannot ask for $40 million instantly. That is bankruptcy." "That is the point," Blackwood said. "But there is an alternative. The majority shareholder of V Capital is willing to convert the debt into equity. We will take 100% ownership of Sterling Ventures. You will sign over the company, the intellectual property, and the building. In exchange, we will not put you in prison for fraud today." Julian slumped into his leather chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. "Who is the shareholder?" he whispered. "Who is behind V Capital? Is it a competitor? Is it Chen?" The lawyer stepped back. He turned toward the open doors. "Why don't you ask the chairman yourself?" Blackwood said. The room went silent. Even the shredders outside seemed to stop. A rhythmic sound echoed from the hallway. Click, click, click. The sound of sharp, expensive heels striking the marble floor. Julian looked up. I stood in the doorway. I was not wearing the pastel floral dresses Julian liked. I was not wearing the soft cardigans of a submissive housewife. I was wearing a bespoke black Armani power suit tailored to razor-sharp perfection. My hair, usually loose and messy, was pulled back into a severe, sleek bun. My lips were painted a deep crimson. I wasn't Vivian the wife. I was Vivian the shark. I walked into the office. I did not look at Julian. I looked at the office itself. I ran a finger along the leather sofa, checking for dust. "This place is a mess," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "We will have to gut the interior. It smells like desperation and cheap cologne." Julian's mouth fell open. He tried to stand, but his legs failed him. "Vivian," he choked out. What are you doing here? Did you bring the checkbook? Did you sell the house?" I finally turned to look at him. I looked at him with the same dispassionate curiosity one might have for a bug under a microscope. "Sell the house?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "Why would I sell my property to pay your debts?" "Julian, I am not here to pay your debts. I am here to collect them." Julian looked from me to Mr. Blackwood and then back to me. The realization hit him slowly like a cold wave. "No," he whispered. "No. You are V Capital. V Capital stands for Vivian Capital." "Darling," I said, walking around the desk. I stopped right next to his chair. "Get up. You are sitting in my seat. You don't have this kind of money," Julian stammered, clinging to the armrests. "You are a charity volunteer. You live off an allowance." I laughed. It was a low, genuine laugh. "Oh, Julian, you really never paid attention, did you?" My grandmother didn't just leave me a trust fund. She left me a seat on the board of 3 international shipping conglomerates. I have been investing that money since I was 22. While you were playing blackjack in Vegas, I was shorting the housing market. While you were buying jewelry for Chloe, I was buying the debt of your competitors. I leaned down, bringing my face inches from his. I bought your debt at 9 a.m., Julian. I own this building. I own the chairs. I own the servers. And technically, since you signed a personal guarantee on the original loan, I own you. Julian scrambled out of the chair. He backed away until he hit the window. He looked trapped. "This is illegal," he shouted, pointing a finger at me. "This is insider trading. You used marital information to hostile take over your own husband's company." Mr. Blackwood stepped forward. "Actually, Mr. Sterling, since you filed for conservatorship yesterday claiming your wife was mentally incompetent, you legally separated your financial entity from hers. You argued in court filings that she was a stranger to the business. You established the legal precedent that allows her to act as an independent third-party investor. You played yourself." I sat down in the CEO chair. It was comfortable. I spun it around once. "Now let's talk business," I said, picking up a pen. "I am not going to fire you, Julian." Julian blinked. Hope flickered in his eyes. "You're not—" "No," I said, opening a file. "Firing you would trigger a severance package clause in your contract. I don't want to pay you $2 million to leave. I want you to stay." "I want me to stay," he asked, confused. "Yes," I continued, writing notes in the margin of the file, "but not as CEO. That position is filled. I am appointing myself interim CEO. You, however, are going to work in the archives. We need someone to manually digitize the paper records from the last 10 years. It is in the basement. No windows. Minimum wage. Basement." Julian gasped. "I am the founder." "You were the founder," I corrected him. "Now you are an entry-level clerk. And regarding your salary—" I pulled out a calculator. I tapped a few keys loudly. "Minimum wage in New York is $15 an hour. Calculating a 40-hour work week, that is roughly $600 a week. However, you owe V Capital $42 million. I looked up at him with a predatory smile. "So here is the plan, employee Julian. I will garnish 100% of your wages to pay down the debt. I will leave you exactly $50 a week for food. By my calculations, you will be debt-free in approximately 3,000 years. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I can't," I said, closing the file with a snap. And I just did. "Sarah." The terrified assistant poked her head back in. "Yes, Ms. Sterling, call security," I ordered. "Escort Mr. Sterling to the basement. Give him a box for his personal items, but check it before he leaves. I don't want him stealing any company staplers." Julian lunged at me. "You witch, I will kill you." The 6 men in suits moved instantly. They grabbed Julian by the arms before he could take 2 steps. They dragged him backward toward the door. He was kicking and screaming, his dignity completely stripped away. I watched him go. I didn't flinch. As his screams faded down the hallway, I turned to Mr. Blackwood. "Arthur," I said calmly, "send a memo to the entire staff. Everyone keeps their jobs. Bonuses are reinstated. And order lunch for the office. Something expensive. We have a lot of work to do to clean up this mess." I swiveled the chair to face the window, looking out at the city that I now owned a little bit more of. The debt was collected, the husband was demoted, and the day was still young. The conference room at Sterling and Associates was designed to intimidate. It was a glass cage suspended 40 floors above the city, filled with the scent of old leather and expensive cologne. Julian sat at the head of the table, looking surprisingly confident for a man who was currently working in his own company's basement. He had shaved, put on a fresh suit, and regained that familiar arrogant sneer. Beside him sat Keisha. She was in her element, arranging legal pads and fountain pens with surgical precision. She did not look at me when I entered. She was wearing her armor, a sharp navy blazer, and a face devoid of emotion. I walked in and took the seat opposite them. I did not bring a lawyer. I did not bring a notepad. I only brought a single sealed manila envelope, which I placed calmly on the polished mahogany table. "Let us begin," Keisha said, her voice professional and cold. "Mr. Sterling is filing a civil suit against you, Vivian, for spousal fraud, material misrepresentation, and emotional distress." I folded my hands on the table. "Spousal fraud," I repeated, keeping my voice flat. That is a creative approach, Julian. It is a winning approach, Julian interrupted, leaning forward. You lied to me for 5 years. You pretended to be a destitute, dependent housewife. You hid assets. You hid your education. You hid your business connections. You manipulated me into making financial decisions based on the false belief that we were struggling. That is fraud. If I had known you were sitting on a shipping empire, I would never have taken those loans. I would never have gambled. You entrapped me. He actually believed it. I watched him speak and realized the depth of his delusion. In his mind, my success was the cause of his failure. He was rewriting history to make himself the victim of a predatory wife who dared to be smarter than him. Keisha cleared her throat. She looked uncomfortable, but she pressed on. The argument, Vivian, is that you breached the fiduciary duty inherent in a marriage contract. By concealing substantial wealth, you denied Mr. Sterling the opportunity to participate in the marital economy fairly. We are suing for 50% of the assets you accumulated during the marriage, plus damages for the reputational harm caused by your hostile takeover. I looked at Keisha. I saw the fatigue around her eyes. I knew she was only doing this because Julian had promised her a massive payout from the settlement. Or perhaps he was blackmailing her with something else. It didn't matter. She was on the wrong side of the table, and she was about to find out just how dangerous that position was. Are you done? I asked, looking from Julian to Keisha. I am just getting started, Julian sneered. We are going to drag you through every court in New York. We will subpoena your offshore accounts. We will expose you as a liar. And when we are done, I will have my company back, and you will be the one working in the basement. I ignored him. I turned my full attention to Keisha. I picked up the manila envelope and slid it across the table. It stopped right in front of her hands. I suggest you open that before you file any papers. Keisha, I said softly. Julian reached for it. Don't touch it, Keisha. It is probably another fake document. She is trying to bluff. Keisha hesitated. She looked at me. She saw something in my eyes that made her pause. It wasn't anger. It was a warning. A genuine woman-to-woman warning. She slapped Julian's hand away and picked up the envelope. She tore it open. Inside was a single stack of bank transfer records. They were not my records. They were Julian's. I watched her eyes scan the pages. I saw the exact moment her heart stopped. Her pupils dilated. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her hands began to shake, rattling the paper against the table. What is this? Julian asked, trying to read over her shoulder. Keisha stood up slowly. She did not look at me anymore. She looked at Julian. The professional mask dropped, completely replaced by the terrifying visage of a mother who has just realized her cub is in danger. Julian, she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so deep it sounded like a growl. What is the Leo Trust? Julian froze. The arrogance vanished from his face instantly. He licked his lips, his eyes darting to the door. It is an investment vehicle, he stammered, for the family. I moved some funds around to get a better interest rate. Keisha picked up the paper and read it aloud, her voice rising with every word. Withdrawal. August 14th. $150,000. Source. The Leo Sterling Medical Trust. Destination. The Sapphire Club, Las Vegas. She looked up at him. Tears were streaming down her face, but they were tears of fury. That is my son's heart surgery money, Julian. That is the fund we started when Leo was diagnosed with the valve defect. You are the trustee. You swore to me that money was safe. Julian stood up, backing away. Keisha, listen. It was a temporary loan. I was going to put it back. I just had a bad run at the tables. I was going to win it back and double it for Leo. I did it for him. You gambled with my son's life, Keisha screamed. The sound was primal. It echoed off the glass walls. She didn't look like a lawyer anymore. She looked like an executioner. Julian tried to laugh, but it came out as a whimper. Come on, Keisha. Don't be dramatic. The surgery isn't until next month. We can sue Vivian. We can get the money from her. We just need to stick together. Stick together? Keisha laughed. It was a jagged, broken sound. She grabbed the lawsuit draft she had spent all night writing. The papers that accused me of fraud. She ripped them in half. Then she ripped them again. She threw the confetti of paper into Julian's face. "I am not your lawyer, Julian," she said, stepping around the table. She walked up to him. He was taller than her, but in that moment she seemed to tower over him. "Keisha, please," Julian begged, raising his hands. Smack! The sound of her hand hitting his face was louder than a gunshot. Julian's head snapped to the side. A red handprint blossomed instantly on his cheek. He stumbled back, crashing into the whiteboard. "You stole from a 6-year-old boy," Keisha hissed, grabbing him by the lapels of his jacket. "You stole from your own nephew. You are not my family. You are a monster." She shoved him away and turned to me. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, composing herself. She looked at the shredded papers on the floor, then at the envelope I had given her. "Vivian," she said, her voice steadying, "do you have the original digital trace of these transfers?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "I have the IP logs, the bank authorization codes, and the timestamp of when he accessed the trust account from the casino Wi-Fi." "Send them to me," Keisha said. She turned back to Julian, who was holding his cheek, looking at us with wide, terrified eyes. "I am not resigning as your counsel," Julian, Keisha said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I am switching sides. I am going to the district attorney's office right now. I am going to hand them proof of embezzlement, fiduciary breach, and grand larceny. I will not just sue you. I will witness against you. I will make sure you go to a prison where they don't have blackjack tables." Julian gasped. "You can't. Attorney-client privilege. Privilege doesn't cover future crimes or crimes against the lawyer's own family interests when the lawyer is a victim," Keisha spat. "And besides, I never signed the retainer agreement for this case. You were too cheap to pay the deposit." She grabbed her briefcase. She didn't look back at him. She looked at me and nodded. It wasn't a nod of friendship. It was a nod of an alliance formed in blood. "Thank you for the envelope, Vivian," she said. She walked out of the room. The door slammed shut behind her, the sound vibrating through the floor. I sat there alone with Julian. He was slumped against the wall, holding his face. The redness was turning purple. He looked at me. He looked stripped. He had no wife. He had no company. And now he had no lawyer and no family. "You planned this," he whispered. "You knew she would react like that." I stood up and smoothed my suit jacket. "I didn't plan for you to steal from a sick child, Julian," I said coldly. "You did that all on your own. I just turned on the lights so she could see who you really are." I walked to the door. I paused and looked back at him one last time. "By the way," I said, "the basement shift starts in 10 minutes. Don't be late. I hear the archives are very dusty this time of year." I left him there in the silence of the glass cage. The legal battle was over before it began. Julian hadn't just lost a lawsuit. He had signed his own warrant, and I didn't even have to raise my voice. I took the elevator down to the lobby, stepping out into the bright New York morning. The air felt cleaner. The city felt lighter. There was only one loose end left now, the mistress. And she was about to learn that in a war between a queen and a pawn, the pawn never survives. Wednesday afternoon was usually reserved for board meetings and strategy sessions, but today my calendar was cleared for a different kind of appointment. I sat at the head of the long obsidian conference table, the surface so polished it looked like a dark pool of water. To my right sat the head of human resources, to my left the head of legal. We were waiting for the final act of the Sterling family tragedy to walk through the door. At 2 o'clock precisely, the elevator doors opened. Chloe marched in. She was no longer wearing the nurse's uniform or the high-fashion couture she had flaunted a week ago. She was wearing a maternity dress that was clearly designed to emphasize a baby bump that was barely there. She held a crumpled tissue in one hand and a lawyer's demand letter in the other. She did not look at the staff who were openly staring at her. She walked straight to the glass doors of the conference room and pushed them open. "Where is my money?" she demanded, throwing the letter onto the table. It slid across the surface and stopped near my coffee cup. I did not look up from my tablet. I swiped a finger across the screen, reviewing the quarterly earnings report. "Hello, Chloe," I said calmly. "You are trespassing. I believe security confiscated your access badge yesterday." "I am not trespassing. I am the mother of the Sterling heir," Chloe shouted. Her voice cracked. She was tired. She was desperate. The accounts she relied on were frozen. The credit cards were dead. She was realizing that being a mistress is only a job as long as the benefactor has a checkbook. I need support, Chloe continued, tears welling up in her eyes. Medical bills, housing. Julian promised me $5,000 a month. If you don't pay me, I will go to the press. I will tell them you are starving a pregnant woman. I finally looked up. I signaled to the security guard standing in the corner. Bring them in, I said. The side door opened. 2 men entered. The first was Julian. He was wearing a gray polo shirt with the company logo stitched on the chest, the uniform of the archives department. His hands were covered in paper dust. He looked defeated, hollowed out by 3 days of manual labor and the crushing reality of his debt. The second man was Marcus. He looked nervous. He had been summoned by legal regarding the embezzlement of his son's trust fund, but he didn't know why he was being brought into a meeting with Chloe and Julian. Julian saw Chloe and his face softened for a moment. He took a step toward her. "Chloe," he said, his voice hoarse, "I told you not to come here. I have nothing. She took everything." Chloe turned on him. "You have nothing because you are weak, Julian. You let her take it." "What about our baby? What about my future?" Julian looked at me. His eyes were pleading. "Vivian, please. Punish me if you want. But the child is innocent. Release some funds for her. It is my child, a Sterling." I stood up. I picked up a remote control from the table. "Is it?" I asked. The room went quiet. The air conditioning hummed. "What do you mean?" Julian asked, frowning. "Of course it is. We have been together for 6 months. I pressed a button on the remote. The motorized screen descended from the ceiling, covering the panoramic view of the city. The projector whirred to life. A single document appeared on the screen in high definition. It was a paternity test result from the Genomic Diagnostics Laboratory of New Jersey. I walked over to the screen using a laser pointer to highlight the text. Exhibit A. I said, my voice clinical. DNA sample collected from Ms. Chloe Miller's toothbrush and personal items found in the master bathroom. Exhibit B, DNA sample collected from Mr. Julian Sterling's hairbrush. Exhibit C, DNA sample collected from a coffee cup used by Mr. Marcus Sterling during our dinner in the Hamptons. Marcus went pale. He took a step back toward the door, but the security guard blocked his path. I pressed the button again. The results page appeared. Probability of paternity for Julian Sterling, 0.0%. Julian stared at the screen. He blinked. He read it again. He shook his head. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "The lab made a mistake." I pressed the button one more time. Probability of paternity for Marcus Sterling, 99.9%. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. I looked at Chloe. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at the floor. She knew. She had known all along. She had just been betting on the horse with the bigger bank account. Julian turned slowly to look at Chloe. "Is it true?" he asked. His voice was barely audible. Chloe shrugged, a gesture of pure self-preservation. "You were always stressed, Julian. You were taking those steroids. You could barely perform. Marcus was there. He listened to me." Julian turned to his brother. Marcus was pressing himself against the wall, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Julian, wait," Marcus stammered. "It was one time. We were drunk. It was the night you passed out at the charity gala." "It meant nothing. Nothing," Julian repeated. The word came out like a strangled cry. "Nothing I stole from the company for her. I stole from your son's heart surgery fund for her. I lost my marriage, my reputation, my entire life for a family that I thought was mine. And it was yours I watched from the head of the table. This was the moment, the final fracture. The Sterling Brotherhood, built on lies and arrogance, was about to collapse under the weight of its own biology. "You are a thief," Marcus said, trying to deflect. "You stole Leo's money. And you stole my life," Julian screamed. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. Julian Sterling, the man who prided himself on his Italian suits and his stoic image, launched himself across the room. He tackled his brother with the ferocity of a wounded animal. They crashed into the sidebar table, sending a pitcher of water and a tray of crystal glasses shattering to the floor. It was ugly. It wasn't a movie fight. It was scratching, biting, and clumsy punches thrown by two men who had never fought for anything real in their lives. They rolled on the expensive carpet, grunting and cursing. Julian was punching Marcus in the face, screaming incomprehensibly. Marcus was clawing at Julian's eyes. Chloe screamed and pressed herself into the corner. The HR director gasped and covered her mouth. I did not move. I did not scream. I stood by the screen, the paternity results still glowing behind me. I watched them tear each other apart. I watched the blood from Marcus's nose splatter onto Julian's archives uniform. I watched the last shred of dignity leave the sterling name. Security, I said softly. Wait. The guard hesitated, his hand on his radio. Let the cameras record this, I instructed, pointing to the CCTV camera in the corner of the ceiling. We need documentation for the termination of employment. Workplace violence is a zero-tolerance offense. We watched for another 30 seconds. Julian had his hands around Marcus's throat. Marcus was turning red. It was primal. It was pathetic. Okay, that is enough, I said. The guards stepped in. They pulled Julian off Marcus. It took two of them to hold him back. Julian was panting, his face smeared with blood and sweat. He looked at his brother, who was coughing and gasping on the floor, holding his ribs. I hate you, Julian spat. I hope you die. I walked over to them. I stood over Marcus, then looked at Julian. You are both fired, I said, effective immediately. Gross misconduct. Assault. And in your case, Marcus, moral turpitude. I turned to Chloe. And you, I said. The baby is a sterling, technically. But since the father is unemployed and facing embezzlement charges, I doubt you will see a penny of child support. I suggest you apply for state assistance. Now get out of my building. Chloe ran. She didn't look back. She ran out the door, leaving her demand letter on the table. The guards dragged Julian and Marcus out. They were still shouting at each other, their voices echoing down the corridor. I was left alone in the conference room with the shattered glass and the glowing screen. I looked at the mess on the floor. It was over. The husband, the brother, the mistress. They had destroyed each other just as I predicted. I picked up the remote and turned off the projector. The room plunged back into the calm, professional lighting of a business that was finally under competent management. I turned to the HR director, who was still shaking. Send a memo to custodial, I said, gathering my files. Have this carpet replaced, and put the video file on a secure drive. We might need it for the police report. I walked out of the room. I felt lighter. The air felt cleaner. The toxicity that had poisoned my life for 5 years had just been scrubbed away. I had one more stop to make. The police station, to hand over the recording, because in my world, we don't just win, we make sure the enemy never rises again. Most people assume that revenge ends when the gavel bangs or the divorce papers are signed. They think the victory lies in the separation, in the dividing of assets, or the moment the moving truck drives away. But I am not most people. I did not want Julian to leave, not yet. Eviction is a mercy. It allows the enemy to disappear, to reinvent themselves in a new city, to tell a sob story to a new victim about how their crazy ex-wife ruined them. I was not going to give Julian that luxury. I needed him to stay. I needed him to live in the ruin he had created. Following the brawl in the conference room, I had Julian released into my custody. Technically, he was out on bail pending the embezzlement trial, and since his assets were frozen, he had no way to pay a bondsman. I posted his bail. I brought him back to the penthouse, but he did not return as the master of the house. He returned as the help. I fired the cleaning staff. I fired the cook. I handed Julian a checklist and a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too small. He slept in the maid's quarters, a windowless room off the kitchen that smelled of bleach and regret. His day started at 5 a.m. He scrubbed the marble floors he used to walk on with Italian leather shoes. He polished the silver he used to eat off of. He dusted the framed photos of our travels photos, where he was smiling and lying to my face. But the cleaning was just physical labor. The real punishment, the one I designed with the precision of a master architect, began every evening at exactly 7 o'clock. It was the cocktail hour. I sat in the living room wearing a silk robe, reading a book, or reviewing the company's daily profits. The sun would be setting over Manhattan, casting long, bloody shadows across the room. Julian. I would call out my voice pleasant and light. It is time. He would emerge from the kitchen. He looked gaunt. The stress had eaten away at his vanity. His hair was graying at the temples, and his hands once manicured were red and chapped from the chemicals. He pushed the bar cart toward me. The wheels squeaked on the floor. "Make it," I ordered, not looking up from my screen. He knew what it was. He didn't have to ask. On the cart sat the ingredients for only one drink: blue curacao, vodka, lime juice, simple syrup. The components of the midnight blue, the drink he had used to try and kill me on our anniversary. I watched him work. His hands shook violently. The clinking of the ice against the metal shaker sounded like chattering teeth. He measured the blue liquid. He poured the vodka. He was terrified. Every single night he was terrified. He poured the mixture into 2 chilled martini glasses. The liquid was a deep electric blue. It looked toxic. It looked beautiful. He placed one glass in front of me. He held the other one in his hand. "Sit," I said, pointing to the ottoman at my feet. He sat. He held the glass with both hands to keep it from spilling. He stared into the blue depths, his eyes wide with a paranoia that was slowly driving him mad. "Drink, Julian," I said softly. He looked up at me. His lip trembled. "Vivian, please," he whispered. "I can't." "Why not?" I asked, tilting my head. "It is just vodka and sugar, isn't it? Unless you put something in it." "No," he gasped. "No, I swear. I made it right here." "You watched me. Then why are you afraid I asked?" He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. He was afraid because he knew what he was capable of, and he assumed I was capable of the same. He was projecting his own evil onto me. He lived in constant fear that I had slipped something into the bottles, that I had tampered with the ice, that tonight was the night I would exact an eye for an eye. I picked up my glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the cold liquid coat my tongue. I swallowed. "Delicious," I said. "Now you." He brought the glass to his lips. He squeezed his eyes shut. He looked like a man facing a firing squad. He took a tiny sip. He held it in his mouth for a second, waiting for the burning sensation, waiting for his heart to stop, waiting for the paralysis. He swallowed. He let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "See?" I said, smiling. "It is refreshing." We sat there in silence. I made him finish the whole glass. Every sip was torture. Every swallow was a gamble with his life. He wasn't dying from poison. He was dying from cortisol. His heart rate was probably 140 beats per minute. He was sweating through his uniform. "Why do you do this?" he asked one evening after the 3rd week. His voice was broken. "Just kick me out. Send me to jail. Please, I can't take this." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had looked me in the eye on our anniversary, smiled, and handed me a death sentence. "I do this because you need to understand, Julian," I said, setting my empty glass down. "You need to understand what it feels like to not be safe in your own home. You need to know the taste of betrayal." I stood up and walked to the window. "You thought I was weak?" I continued. "You thought I was a prop in your life. You didn't realize that the prop was holding up the entire stage. And now that I have stepped away, the roof is falling on your head." He put his head in his hands. "Are you going to kill me?" he asked. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Kill you? No, Julian. That would be too easy. The dead don't pay debts. The dead don't feel regret. I want you alive. I want you to wake up every morning knowing that you lost everything because of your own greed. I want you to look at that blue drink and remember the moment you decided I wasn't worth keeping alive." I walked back to him. I reached out and touched his cheek. He flinched as if I had burned him. "Besides," I whispered, "who would clean the toilets if you were dead?" The torture was effective. He was losing weight. He was jumping at shadows. He stopped sleeping. He was becoming the crazy, paranoid wreck he had tried to paint me as in the press. The irony was perfect. One night he tried to refuse. He pushed the glass away. "I won't drink it," he said, trying to summon a shred of his old defiance. I didn't argue. I just picked up my phone. "Okay," I said. I will call the district attorney. I will tell him you violated your bail conditions. I will tell him you tried to access a computer to transfer funds. They will revoke your bail. You will go to Rikers Island tonight. General population." Julian froze. He knew what happened to soft, wealthy men in Rikers. He reached for the glass. He drank it in one gulp. He choked, coughing as the alcohol burned his throat. "Good boy," I said. This went on for a month, 30 days of blue cocktails, 30 days of terror. I watched him disintegrate. I watched the man who thought he was a king turn into a frightened mouse. And the best part, the bottles were never poisoned. I never put a single drop of anything toxic in them. The poison was in his mind. The poison was his own guilt. I was just holding the mirror, forcing him to stare at his own reflection until he couldn't stand the sight of himself anymore. On the 31st night, I didn't ask him to make the drink. I walked into the kitchen where he was eating a sandwich over the sink. "Pack your things," I said. He dropped the sandwich. "What pack your things?" I repeated. "The police are coming." He looked confused. "Why, I did everything you asked. I cleaned, I found the second phone, Julian." I lied. He went pale. "I didn't have a second phone." "I know," I said, "but the police found one in your mattress. Or they will when they get here. A burner phone used to contact offshore hackers, evidence of flight risk." It was a lie, but he was too broken to fight it. He was too exhausted to argue. He just slumped against the counter. "You are evil," he whispered. I smiled. "No, Julian. I am just a better businessman than you." I walked out of the kitchen. I heard the sirens in the distance. I had called them 10 minutes ago, not for a phone, but because the forensic accountants had finally finished their report. They had found the trail of the money he stole from the charity. It was a federal crime. The FBI was on their way. I went to the bar cart. I poured myself a glass of water. I looked at the bottle of blue curacao. I picked it up and walked to the sink. I poured the blue syrup down the drain. It swirled away, disappearing into the dark pipes. "Goodbye, Midnight Blue," I said. The game was over. I had broken him. I had humiliated him. And now I was going to lock him away. The psychological warfare had served its purpose. It had stripped him of his defenses, leaving him raw and exposed for the final blow of justice. He wouldn't just go to prison as a criminal. He would go as a broken man who was afraid of the color blue. And that, to me, was the only closure I needed. The escape attempt happened exactly 48 hours after I poured the blue syrup down the drain. Julian was a predictable creature. When cornered, a rat does not fight. It runs. I knew he had a stash of emergency cash hidden inside the lining of his old golf bag. It was roughly $12,000, a pathetic amount for a man who used to spend that much on a single dinner, but enough to buy a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country. I had watched him on the hidden camera in the maid's quarters as he frantically cut open the leather bag with a steak knife, stuffing the bills into his pockets. I did not stop him. I did not lock the door. I needed him to run. Attempting to flee the jurisdiction was the final piece of legal leverage I needed to ensure he never saw the light of day again. I waited until he slipped out the service entrance at 3 a.m. I waited until the tracker on the family sedan, which he had stolen keys for, began moving toward the Van Wyck Expressway. Then I picked up the phone. I did not call 911. I called Detective Miller, the lead investigator on the embezzlement case. He was expecting my call. "He is on the move," I said simply. "Heading to JFK Terminal 4. I got into my own car, a black SUV with tinted windows, and followed at a safe distance. I wanted to see this. I wanted to witness the moment the illusion finally shattered completely. The international terminal at JFK is a chaotic place, even in the middle of the night. Julian abandoned the car at the curb, leaving the door open. He didn't care about parking tickets. He didn't care about the car. He was running on pure adrenaline and terror. I parked legally and walked into the terminal, flanked by 2 plainclothes officers who had met me at the entrance. We spotted him immediately. He was standing at the ticket counter for an airline that flew directly to Brazil. He was sweating profusely, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. He looked like a fugitive. He looked guilty. I stood behind a concrete pillar, close enough to hear, but hidden from his line of sight. "One way to Rio de Janeiro," Julian demanded, slamming his passport onto the counter. "First class." I need to leave tonight." The agent typed on her keyboard. She frowned. "Sir, the next flight is in 2 hours. That will be $4,000. Julian pulled out a credit card. It was a platinum Amex hidden in his sock. He thought I hadn't found that one. He swiped it. The agent waited. Then she looked up. "Declined, sir." Julian's hand shook. "Try it again. It has a $50,000 limit. It says refer to issuer, sir. The card has been reported stolen." I smiled. I had reported it stolen 5 minutes ago from the car. He cursed loud enough for people to stare. He dug into his pockets and pulled out the crumpled wads of cash he had taken from the golf bag. He threw them on the counter. "Fine. Cash. Just give me the ticket." The agent looked at the pile of bills with distaste. She started counting. "Sir, this is enough for economy class only, and I will need to see a return ticket or a visa for Brazil." "I don't need a return ticket," Julian shouted. "Just get me on the plane. Sir, lower your voice or I will call security." Julian grabbed the boarding pass she printed. He didn't wait for his change. He grabbed his carry-on suitcase and ran toward the TSA checkpoint. He thought he had made it. He thought he was minutes away from freedom. He reached the security line. He was fumbling with his shoes, trying to get them off fast enough. He put his bag on the belt. That was when I stepped out. "Going somewhere, Julian?" I asked. My voice carried over the noise of the terminal. He froze. He looked up, one shoe in his hand. He saw me standing there, calm, collected, wearing a trench coat. Behind me stood 4 uniformed Port Authority police officers and 2 agents in FBI windbreakers. "Vivian," he gasped. He looked at the security checkpoint, then back at me. He realized there was nowhere to go. Julian Sterling, one of the FBI agents, announced, stepping forward. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and flight to avoid prosecution." Julian dropped his shoe. "No," he stammered. "I am not fleeing. I have a business trip. At 3 in the morning, with a one-way ticket bought with cash." The agent scoffed. "Cuff him." As the officers grabbed his arms, pinning him against the metal detector, I walked closer. I reached into my purse. "Wait," I said to the detective. "There is one more charge you need to add to the sheet." I pulled out a small black USB drive and a clear evidence bag containing a small glass vial with blue residue. "What is this?" the detective asked. "Evidence of attempted murder," I said, looking straight into Julian's eyes. Julian went limp in the officer's grip. His face turned the color of ash. On this drive, I continued, my voice steady and loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, is a recording from the night of our anniversary. In it, Mr. Sterling is heard confirming that the poison he administered to me was untraceable and would cause cardiac arrest within 20 minutes. I held up the vial. "And this," I said, "is the vial of succinylcholine he used. He was arrogant enough to keep it in his briefcase. I found it when I was packing his things for prison." "Liar!" Julian screamed, struggling against the cuffs. "You planted that. That is just cough syrup." "Is it?" I asked. "Then why did I find your fingerprints on it?" "Julian, and why does the batch number match the inventory missing from your brother's hospital supply closet?" The detective took the bag. "We will run it through the lab. Mrs. Sterling, if it matches, he is looking at 25 to life." Julian began to cry. It was a pathetic, wailing sound. He fell to his knees on the dirty airport floor. "Vivian, please," he sobbed. "I am your husband. Don't do this. I will sign the papers. I will give you everything. Just don't let them take me." "You have nothing to give, Julian," I said coldly. "I already took everything." "Officer, check his bag," I instructed. He claimed he was going on a business trip. Let's see what a CEO packs for a business trip. The officer grabbed Julian's carry-on. He zipped it open and dumped the contents onto the security table. There were no Italian suits, no silk ties, no Rolex watches. Out tumbled a pile of gray rags, old t-shirts with holes in them, a pair of worn-out sneakers, and a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in a napkin. The crowd laughed. Someone took a picture. The officer held up a t-shirt. It was the uniform from the archives department. "Looks like he was planning to start a new life as a janitor," the officer joked. I looked at the pile of trash that used to be his life. This was the man who had mocked me for not having a seat at the table. This was the man who had called me useless. Now he was kneeling on the floor, surrounded by his own failure, owning nothing but the clothes on his back and a prison sentence. "Take him away," I said, turning my back on him. "He is missing his flight." As they dragged him out of the terminal, he was still screaming my name. But I didn't look back. I walked toward the exit, the automatic doors sliding open to reveal the cool night air. The final receipt had been delivered. The debt was paid in full. And unlike Julian, I had a first-class life waiting for me. I took out my phone and called Keisha. "It is done," I said. "He is in custody." "Good," Keisha replied on the other end. "I have the divorce papers ready. I will bring them to the jail in the morning. He will sign them in exchange for a pack of cigarettes." I hung up and got into my car. I didn't drive home immediately. I drove to the Brooklyn Bridge. I parked and looked out at the skyline. The city lights were twinkling like diamonds, my diamonds. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't plotting. I wasn't calculating. I was just existing. And it felt magnificent. The war was over. The Queen was still standing, and the King was in checkmate permanently. The Supreme Court of New York is not a place for emotions. It is a place for arithmetic. It is where lives are reduced to docket numbers and years are traded like currency. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my posture perfect, my expression unreadable. I was wearing white, not the white of a bride, but the blinding clinical white of a surgeon who has just completed a successful amputation. Julian sat at the defense table. He was no longer the master of the universe. The orange jumpsuit of the Department of Corrections hung loosely on his frame, which had withered after a month of prison food and sleepless nights. His wrists, once adorned with a Patek Philippe watch, were now cuffed to the table. He did not look at the judge. He kept turning his head, searching the room for an ally, for a friend, for anyone who still believed the lies he had spun for a decade. But the pews behind him were empty. His fair-weather friends had vanished the moment the indictment hit the news. The only person sitting behind him was a court-appointed public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The Honorable Justice Harrison entered the room. The bailiff called for order. We stood. I watched Julian struggle to stand the chains rattling against the wood. It was a sound I would never tire of hearing. The trial had been swift. The evidence I provided was irrefutable. The voice recordings, the forensic accounting logs, the video from Times Square, and the vial of poison. But today was not about the evidence. Today was about the sentencing. And more importantly, today was about the final witness for the prosecution regarding the character of the defendant. The prosecutor stood up. "The people call Keisha Sterling to the stand." Julian's head snapped up. He looked at the witness box. He had expected Keisha to flee to hide, or perhaps to stay silent to protect the family name. He did not expect to see his sister-in-law walk into the courtroom with the stride of a predator. Keisha looked impeccable. She wore a sharp black suit that screamed authority. She took the oath without hesitation. She sat down and adjusted the microphone. She looked at Julian. There was no pity in her eyes. There was only the cold, hard calculation of a mother protecting her young. "Ms. Sterling," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court your relationship to the defendant?" "He is my brother-in-law," Keisha said, her voice clear and steady. "And he was the trustee of my son Leo's medical trust fund." Was the prosecutor repeated. "And what did the defendant do with that trust fund?" Keisha leaned into the microphone. She made sure every reporter in the back of the room heard her next words. "He stole it," she stated flatly. "He liquidated $150,000 meant for a pediatric heart valve replacement surgery. He used the money to gamble at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas and to purchase luxury gifts for his mistress. He knowingly endangered the life of a 6-year-old boy to fund his addiction and his affair." Julian let out a strangled noise. "Keisha, please," he whispered. Keisha did not flinch. She continued, her voice rising in intensity. "The defendant is a pathological liar, Your Honor. He manipulated his wife, he defrauded his investors, and he betrayed his own blood. As an officer of the court myself, I have reviewed the financial records provided by Vivian Sterling. They are accurate. Julian Sterling is not a businessman. He is a predator who feeds on the trust of those who love him. He deserves no leniency." The courtroom was silent. Julian slumped in his chair. The betrayal was absolute. Keisha had chosen survival. She had chosen to align herself with the winner. By testifying against him, she was scrubbing the stain of his crimes from her own reputation. She was proving to the Bar Association that she was a victim, not an accomplice. It was a brilliant legal maneuver, and I respected her for it. The judge adjusted his glasses. He looked down at Julian with profound disgust. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "I have sat on this bench for 20 years. I have seen murderers, thieves, and gang leaders, but I have rarely seen a white-collar criminal display such a callous disregard for human life. You poisoned your wife, you robbed your nephew, you defrauded your shareholders." Julian tried to speak. "Your Honor, I can pay it back. I just need time." "You have no time, Mr. Sterling," the judge cut him off. "You are bankrupt. Your assets have been seized to pay restitution to V Capital and the Medical Trust. You have nothing." The gavel raised. I held my breath. "Julian Sterling, I sentence you to 15 years in a maximum security state penitentiary without the possibility of parole for the first 10 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $5 million in restitution. Since you are insolvent, your future wages will be garnished at 90% for the remainder of your natural life." The gavel came down. Bang! The sound echoed like a gunshot. Julian screamed. It wasn't a word. It was just a raw sound of terror. The bailiffs moved in instantly. They grabbed him by the arms. "Vivian," he shouted, twisting his body to look at me. "Vivian, help me, look at me. I am sorry. I will do anything." I stood up slowly. I smoothed my skirt. I looked him in the eye. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I gave him absolutely nothing. I watched him being dragged through the side door, his orange jumpsuit disappearing into the shadows of the holding cell. He was gone. The man who had terrorized me for 5 years was now just a number in the state system. I walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was filled with reporters. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in my face. "Mrs. Sterling, how do you feel? Is it true you are taking over the company? What about the mistress?" I stopped. I put on my sunglasses. "Justice was served," I said simply. "And please address me as Ms. Vasquez. I have dropped the Sterling name as of this morning." I walked through the crowd, flanked by my security team. As I got into the waiting limousine, I pulled out my tablet to check the news. The world outside the courtroom had been busy while we were inside. The headlines were delicious. I scrolled to the section about Marcus. The medical board had convened an emergency session that morning. Based on the DNA evidence I had released and the public brawl at the office, they had voted unanimously. Marcus Sterling had his medical license permanently revoked for gross moral turpitude and violation of patient ethics. He was uninsurable. No hospital in the country would hire him. The article mentioned he was currently being sued by 3 former patients for malpractice cases that Keisha had previously suppressed but had now mysteriously stopped defending. Marcus was facing a future of bankruptcy and disgrace. He would likely spend the rest of his life selling medical equipment over the phone if he was lucky. And then there was Chloe. I opened social media. Her name was trending, but not in the way she had hoped. The internet is a cruel place, and it had descended on her with the fury of a swarm of locusts. Someone had leaked the video of her crashing the board meeting. Someone else had leaked the photos of her partying in Vegas on the charity's dime. She had been fired from every brand partnership she had tried to secure. Her landlord had evicted her for non-payment. The latest update showed a paparazzi photo of her loading a U-Haul truck in the rain. The caption read, "Mistress moves back to Ohio." I tapped on her profile. She was live streaming. She was sitting in a messy bedroom that looked like her childhood home. She was crying, holding up a bottle of cheap diet pills. "Guys, please buy these," she sobbed into the camera. "I need money for diapers. The Sterling family ruined me." I watched for 5 seconds, then I blocked her. She wasn't a villain anymore. She was just a tragedy, a cautionary tale about what happens when you try to build a castle on a foundation of lies. The car moved smoothly through the traffic of downtown Manhattan. I looked out the window. I saw the Sterling Ventures building towering over the skyline. The sign was already being taken down. The new logo V Capital was being prepped for installation. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Keisha. "It is done," the text read. "Leo's surgery is scheduled for Tuesday. I transferred the funds from my personal savings to cover what Julian stole." "Thank you for not destroying me, Vivian," I replied. "You saved yourself, Keisha. Just make sure Leo grows up to be a better man than his uncle and his father." I put the phone away. I leaned back in the leather seat. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full of possibility. I had my money. I had my company. I had my freedom. And somewhere in a cold concrete cell, Julian was learning the true meaning of the word consequences. The slate was clean. The story of the victim was over. The story of the conqueror had just begun. 6 months is a long time in the world of finance. In 6 months, markets can crash, empires can rise, and a woman who was once dismissed as a trophy wife can triple her net worth. But inside the walls of the upstate correctional facility, 6 months is just a series of identical gray days. I parked my Bentley in the visitor lot, the chrome shining starkly against the cracked asphalt and chain-link fences. I did not have to come here. My lawyer advised against it. My friends told me to move on. But closing a deal requires a final signature, and closing a chapter of life requires a final look at the wreckage. I needed to see him one last time, not to gloat, but to verify. I needed to ensure that the ghost that had haunted my house was truly exorcised. I walked through the metal detectors. I surrendered my phone and my purse. I sat in the sterile waiting room on a plastic chair bolted to the floor, surrounded by crying mothers and girlfriends holding babies. They were there to offer love. I was there to offer nothing. "Visitor for inmate 84930. The guard barked. I stood up and smoothed the skirt of my charcoal wool suit. I walked down the long corridor, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The smell of the prison was distinct. It smelled of industrial cleaner and human misery. I was led to booth number 4. A thick sheet of plexiglass divided the world into 2 halves, the free and the condemned. I waited. 3 minutes later, the heavy steel door on the other side buzzed open. Julian walked in. He was unrecognizable. The man who used to spend an hour every morning styling his hair and moisturizing his skin was gone. In his place was a gaunt, shaved-headed stranger in a faded orange jumpsuit. His skin was sallow, deprived of sunlight. His posture, once arrogant and upright, was hunched. But as soon as he saw me, his eyes lit up. Not with love, and not even with remorse. They lit up with hate. That familiar burning entitlement was the only thing prison hadn't stripped away. He sat down. He picked up the black phone receiver. I picked up mine. "Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. "You look expensive," he sneered. His voice was scratchy, unused to civil conversation. "Spending my money well, I see." "It is not your money, Julian," I corrected him gently. "It never was. It was the company's money. It was the investor's money. And now it is my money." He gripped the phone tighter. His knuckles turned white. "You think you are so smart, don't you?" he hissed. "You think you pulled off the perfect crime. You set me up. You planted that vial. You bribed Keisha. You turned my own brother against me. You are a witch, Vivian. A cold, heartless witch." I listened to him. I let him pour his poison through the wire. It was fascinating. Even here in a cage of his own making, he could not accept responsibility. In his mind, he was still the hero of the story, tragically felled by a villainous woman. "I did not plant the vial, Julian," I said. "You bought it. I have the credit card receipt from the dark web marketplace where you ordered it. Do you remember? You used the account registered to your shell company, J-Star Limited. The same company you used to hide your gambling debts. You left a digital trail so wide a blind man could follow it." He slammed his fist against the counter. The guard behind him took a step forward, hand on his baton. Julian flinched. He was afraid of the guards. That was new. The old Julian feared no one because he thought money was a shield. Now he knew that in here, currency was physical strength, and he had none. "You ruined me," he whispered, leaning closer to the glass. "I made you Vivian. I picked you up from that boring middle-class life. I gave you a penthouse. I gave you status. And this is how you repay me, by stealing my legacy." I sighed. I reached into the folder I had brought with me. Legacy, I asked. Is that what you call it? I pulled out a newspaper. It was the morning edition of the Financial Times. I pressed it against the glass so he could read the headline. Vivian Vasquez acquires sterling rivals. New Queen of New York. Real estate debuts V-Tower. He read it. His eyes scanned the photo on the front page. It was me wearing a hard hat cutting the ribbon on a new 70-story skyscraper. The skyscraper that was built on the site of the warehouse he had tried to sell for scrap metal 2 years ago. You see, Julian, I said, keeping the paper pressed to the glass. You didn't have a legacy. You had a Ponzi scheme. You were shuffling debt from one pile to another, hoping the music wouldn't stop. I stopped the music, and then I bought the orchestra. He stared at the photo. He looked at the stock ticker symbol in the corner of the page, VCAP. It was trading at $400 a share. When he was CEO, Sterling Ventures traded at $40. How he breathed. How did you do this? You were just a housewife. You arranged flowers. I lowered the paper. I was never just a housewife, Julian. I was an observer. I sat at your dinner parties and listened to your friends brag about their bad investments. I read the contracts you left on the bedside table while you were sleeping off your hangovers. I learned everything not to do by watching you. You were my greatest teacher in failure. He looked at me with a mixture of awe and revulsion. So you won, he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. You came all the way here to show me a newspaper, to rub it in my face. Are you happy, Vivian? Does it make you feel big to kick a man when he is down? You are a cruel, sadistic woman. I looked at him. I looked at the orange jumpsuit. I looked at the desperate anger in his eyes. He wanted me to be angry. He wanted me to scream at him. He wanted passion. Because if I hated him, it meant he still had power over me. It meant he still occupied space in my emotional world. I folded the newspaper neatly and placed it back in my bag. I am not happy, Julian, I said. And I am not sad. I feel absolutely nothing. I leaned forward. And regarding your question, you asked if I won. I paused. I let the silence stretch between us. Winning implies a competition, Julian. It implies that we were playing the same game, that you were a worthy opponent, but you weren't. You were a liability, a bad asset, a glitch in the system. I stood up. I looked down at him through the glass. I didn't beat you, Julian, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. I just cleaned up. I sanitized my life. I removed the mold before it could spread to the foundation. He stood up too, his chains rattling. I am your husband, he shouted. You can't erase me. I looked at him one last time. I already have, I said. I filed the final divorce decree this morning. My name is Vasquez. And you? You are just inmate 84930. I turned to walk away. You are a monster, he screamed, slamming his hands against the glass. You are trash, Vivian. You hear me? You are trash. I stopped. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch his reflection in the plexiglass. No, Julian, I said softly, delivering the final verdict. I took out the trash. You are the trash. I hung up the phone. I walked away. Behind me, I heard him screaming. I heard the guards shouting orders. I heard the scuffle as they restrained him, but it sounded distant, like noise from a television in another room. I pushed open the heavy steel doors and stepped out into the sunlight. The air was crisp. My driver was waiting. Where to, Ms. Vasquez? He asked as he opened the door. To the office, I said, sliding into the leather seat. I have a board meeting at 2, and stop by the florist. I want to buy some lilies, blue ones. Why blue, ma'am? He asked. To remind me, I said, smiling, as the prison faded in the rearview mirror. To remind me that even the most beautiful things can be poison if you are not careful. The car sped up, merging onto the highway. I opened my laptop. The spreadsheet was waiting. The numbers were green. The past was red. And I never looked back at red numbers. The audit was complete. The account was closed. And business was booming. Rome is not just a city, it is a museum of survival. Everywhere you look, there are ruins that have refused to crumble completely. They stand defiant against time and war and history. That is why I chose it for the 1-year anniversary of my freedom. I stood on the terrace of the Hotel Eden, looking out over the 7 hills. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burning gold. I was wearing a dress the color of crushed rubies. It was backless daring and paid for with the dividends from my acquisition of a European hotel chain. I was no longer Vivian the wife or Vivian the victim. I was simply Vivian. The party behind me was in full swing. It was an exclusive gathering of global investors and real estate tycoons. The air smelled of expensive cigars and truffle oil. I leaned against the stone balustrade, feeling the warmth of the ancient stone against my skin. A year ago, I was trembling on a balcony in New York, terrified of a man who was planning to kill me. Tonight, the only thing I feared was running out of champagne. A shadow fell across my shoulder. I turned slowly. A man was standing there. He was tall, with the kind of effortless elegance that only Italian men seem to possess. He had salt and pepper hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was holding 2 glasses of wine. "Signora Vasquez," he said, his voice deep and smooth, "you are making the view jealous. Everyone is looking at you instead of the Vatican." I smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes. "I am just enjoying the fresh air, Matteo," I said. "And please call me Vivian." Matteo was the owner of the shipping logistics firm I had partnered with last month. He was wealthy, powerful, and notoriously kind, a rare combination in my world. He offered me a glass. "Barolo," he said, 1996. "A good year, complex, strong, just like you." I took the glass. I looked at the liquid. It was a deep, rich red, the color of life. The color of blood pumping through a healthy heart. It was not blue. I would never drink anything blue again. "Thank you, Matteo," I said, taking a sip. "It is perfect." He moved closer to me, but not too close. He respected my space. He respected the invisible armor I still wore. "You know, Vivian," he said, looking out at the city, "there are rumors about you. People say you are the ice queen of New York. They say you bought your husband's debt and turned him into a janitor. They say you have no heart." I laughed softly. "And what do you think, Matteo?" He looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch for a second. "I think you are a woman who survived a war," he said. "And I think you are lonely up there in your tower." He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from my shoulder. His touch was warm, gentle. It was the touch of a man who wanted to protect, not possess. "I have a villa in Tuscany," he whispered. "It is quiet there. No board meetings, no lawyers. Just vineyards and olive trees. Come with me this weekend, Vivian. Let me show you what it feels like to be taken care of." It was a tempting offer. A year ago, the old Vivian would have melted. She would have been desperate for this validation, desperate for a man to save her from her solitude. But I looked at Matteo, and I felt a strange calm clarity. He was a good man. But I did not need a good man. I did not need a villa in Tuscany to feel safe. I carried my safety in my bank account. I carried my peace in the deed to my penthouse. I carried my worth in the silence of my own mind. I placed my hand over his on the railing. "That sounds beautiful, Matteo," I said honestly. "And you are a charming man, but I cannot go with you." "Why not?" he asked, disappointment clouding his eyes. "Are you still in love with him?" I shook my head. "No, I am not in love with him. I am not even angry at him anymore. He is a ghost." "Then what is it?" he asked. I looked out at the lights of Rome flickering to life in the twilight. "I am in love with this," I said, gesturing to the space around me. "I am in love with my freedom. For 5 years I was a wife. I was a partner. I was a suspect. I was a victim. Now I am just me, and I am just getting to know myself. I don't want to share my peace yet. I fought too hard to get it." Matteo looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. A sad, understanding smile. "I understand," he said. "You are not ready to be a duo." "No," I corrected him. "I am already a complete orchestra. I don't need a conductor." He raised his glass to me. "To freedom, then, Vivian," he said. "To freedom," I replied, clinking my glass against his. He bowed slightly and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of the party. I watched him go. I felt a twinge of something, perhaps a memory of what companionship felt like, but it passed quickly like a cloud over the moon. I turned back to the view. I took another sip of the Barolo. It tasted of earth and cherries and history. I was alone on the terrace, but I was not lonely. I had my empire. I had my dignity. And most importantly, I had the knowledge that no one could ever pull the chair out from under me again because I had built my own table. I closed my eyes and let the Roman breeze kiss my face. This was what victory tasted like. Not bitter, not sweet, just rich and full and entirely mine. I finished the wine and set the glass on the stone wall. It was time to go. I had a morning flight to Tokyo, another deal to close, another city to conquer. I walked through the party, moving through the crowd like a shark moving through water. People parted for me. They whispered my name. I kept my head high. I was Vivian Vasquez, and I was just getting started. If there is one thing I have learned from staring into the bottom of a poisoned glass, it is this. Ladies, listen to me closely. Never let a man mix a drink for you if you do not know exactly what is in the bottle. And I am not just talking about cocktails. I am talking about your life. They mix drinks of promises. They pour shots of flattery. They shake up cocktails of financial dependency and garnish them with gaslighting. They tell you that you are safe. They tell you that you don't need to worry about the bills. They tell you that they will take care of everything, and you drink it. You drink it because it tastes sweet. You drink it because you want to believe that love is enough. But love is not a business plan. Love is not a retirement fund. And love certainly is not a defense attorney. I stood in the first-class lounge of the airport, typing this final entry into my journal. The coffee was hot, the Wi-Fi was secure, and my portfolio was up 4% since breakfast. People ask me if I regret what I did to Julian. They ask if it was too harsh to send the father of my potential children to prison. They ask if I feel guilty for destroying his brother and his mistress. I tell them the same thing every time. Does a surgeon feel guilty for cutting out a tumor? Does a gardener feel guilty for pulling up weeds? Julian was not a husband. He was a parasite. He fed on my empathy. He leveraged my trust. He bet against my intelligence. And when he lost, he expected a bailout. But I am not the government. I do not bail out failing institutions. I liquidate them. The most dangerous lie women are told is that we must be soft to be loved. We are taught to be accommodating, to sign the papers without reading them, to let the men handle the heavy lifting. That softness is what almost killed me. It was only when I became hard, when I became cold, when I became as unyielding as a diamond that I survived. Stoicism is not about having no feelings. It is about not being a slave to them. When I saw Julian with Chloe, I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to burn the house down. But screaming does not pay the mortgage. Crying does not secure assets. And burning the house down only leaves you homeless. So I did the hardest thing a woman can do. I waited. I calculated. I gathered my receipts. Financial independence is the only husband you will ever need. It listens to you. It supports you. It never lies to you at 2 a.m, and it certainly never tries to poison you for an insurance payout. If you are listening to this and you are sitting in a house you do not own driving a car, you did not pay for asking for an allowance from a man who checks your receipts. I want you to wake up. Start a secret account. Learn about the stock market. Read the contracts. Ask the difficult questions. Be the person who counts the chairs at the table. And if there is no chair for you, do not stand there and cry. Buy the restaurant, fire the staff, and build a new table where you sit at the head. My name is Vivian. I was a victim of the Sterling family. Now I am the owner of the Sterling legacy. I turned their hate into my fuel. I turned their debt into my fortune, and I turned their blue poison into my red wine of victory. The flight attendant is calling my row. Tokyo awaits. There is a skyscraper there that is undervalued, and I think it would look perfect in my portfolio. I picked up my bag. It is a Birkin paid for with the interest from Julian's garnished wages. I smiled at the thought. Every time I carry it, I feel the weight of justice in my hand. But before I go, I have a question for you. A question that might save your life, or at least your bank account. Have you ever answered the phone and heard a tone in your husband's voice that didn't sound right? Have you ever found a receipt that didn't make sense? Have you ever felt that gut instinct screaming that something was wrong, but you swallowed it down with a glass of wine? Don't swallow it. Spit it out and start looking for the antidote. Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. I want to know who is awake. I want to know who is ready to stop being a passenger and start flying the plane. If this story of a woman who turned a death sentence into a dynasty resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Share it with a friend who is too trusting. You might just save her life. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel. We are building a community here, a community of women who deal in receipts, not rumors, a community of women who know that the best revenge is not just living well, it is owning the building where your ex-husband mops the floors. This is Vivian signing off. Stay cold, stay rich, and always, always read the fine print.